Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Horror Chronicles. Before we start, I would like to know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. Also, if these stories help you to sleep, I would be grateful if you would subscribe to the channel. Now make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's get started. Story number 1. I've lived here my whole life and most of the residents felt like family to me. Especially two kids that I have known since preschool, Brandon and Jake. We had similar interests and spent pretty every minute together. It was just a couple of months before our graduation, but we weren't thinking about that. Our final class of the day was video production, and we loved it because filmmaking had always been a shared passion of ours. From running the camera to acting or editing, we loved it all. And it was time to start our final project. "Quiet down, everybody," Mr. Peterson said, everyone quickly coming to a silence. "Today you will be starting your final for this class. I am going to give you 4 weeks to complete it. 1 week to figure out what you want to do, and 3 weeks to shoot and edit. Any questions?" I raise my hand and he points to me. "Yes, Dylan, what was your question?" "What can it be about?" "Anything you find interesting, honestly. As long as it is appropriate. I hope I can trust all of you to keep these PG." He then proceeded to hand a paper out to the class with the specifics on the project. It just had to be an hour long and include a few key things he was looking for. I think it just to show that we had actually been paying attention to him in class. Coming up with an idea was a lot harder than we had anticipated. The first couple days of brainstorming accomplished nothing but waste time and gas. We had discussed all of the easier options, but nothing seemed to grab our attention. A few days later, an idea finally came to us while we were in my car. "Why is this so hard?" Brandon whines. "Going with something easy feels like such a waste. This is like our dream project, guys." "I know, Jake. We all feel the same way. I just don't know what else to do, man. That documentary idea Jake had yesterday sounded pretty good," I say. Yeah, it'll work. It's just going to be super boring," Jake said, pausing for a second only to speak again. "What about a found footage film? Everyone likes a good scary movie nowadays, right? Are we even allowed to make a scary movie?" "I don't think Mr. Peterson will mind, as long as we don't throw in any jump scares," he joked. "That sounds awesome. I bet we're going to be the only ones in class making a scary movie too," Brandon said, obviously excited. "What are you thinking, Dylan? Do you like that idea?" "I do. It sounds perfect. We just need a good location." It was quiet for a bit before Brandon spoke again. "That'll probably be the hardest part. Let's each look up some spots tonight and see what we can find. Bring anything that looks good tomorrow." I dropped them both off at home and made my way across town to my place. It was a little crazy that we hadn't thought of this idea sooner. We spent most weekends at my place looking for a new scary movie to watch, and found footage happened to be our favorite genre. It was close to 8 o'clock when I finally got home, so I warmed up some leftovers and started luing into spots. I was really hoping the guys had better luck than me, because all I found was a little abandoned hunting cabin about 10 miles outside of town that everybody already knew about. I was sure the guys wouldn't care for it, but I printed it anyway since I had nothing else. This little house has always been a mystery in our town. It was apparently over 200 years old and is sat abandoned the last century or so, but no one really knows why. Everybody has a different story, but no one will dare step foot anywhere near it. If we were looking for a haunted place, this was probably our best option. I didn't see them until lunch most days. The next day was a little different though, because none of us had gotten any food. We were all so wrapped up in this project that eating was the last thing on our minds. "Did you guys find anything good?" Jake asks us excitedly before even greeting us. "Because if I'm being honest, you didn't look anything up last night, did you?" "I'm sorry, I got home and started gaming and totally spaced," he said, trying not to laugh. "Well, what do you got?" "I found an old house in town that's been abandoned for a while, but it's no asylum," said Brandon, a big fan of anything to do with an old, creepy institution. I was hesitant to bring up mine since everyone in town already knew about it, but I decided I probably should since Brandon had the only other idea and has looked less promising than mine. "All I found was that really old hunting cabin outside of town. It isn't much, but I think we could make it work for this," I finally muttered. I pulled a paper from my bag and handed it to them. "Oh yeah, I've heard of this place," Brandon says excitedly, handing the paper to Jake after looking at it for a bit. "Isn't it called like Hollow Point or something?" Jake says, still looking at the paper. "That's what everyone in town calls it, but I didn't see any mention of that name online. It just looks like a really old cabin up the mountain a bit. I remember hearing about this place when we were younger. It seemed like everybody had a story. Well, a story that someone told them at least, he replied. The bell rang. Jake handed the paper back to me and we made our separate ways toward our next class. I couldn't stop thinking about this place. I spent the next couple classes jotting down any ideas that came to mind. I was so excited, and when last period finally came, I could tell the guys felt the same way. I am so ready to go check this place out, Jake says while doing a little dance. Yeah, I'm pumped, dude. This is going to be awesome. You guys are welcome, by the way. If you recall, I was the one that came up with the found footage idea, Jake said jokingly. And I was the one that brought up Hollow Point, so you are welcome for that. Once we were out of school, we all climbed into my car and started making our way to this spot, hoping to explore it a bit before the sun went down. I put the locations in my phone. It was just under 20 minutes away. We were all hungry from skipping lunch, so we decided to stop at a little gas station along the way. We found what we wanted and made our way to the counter, talking about the cabin the whole time. Did you guys mention Hollow Point? The old man asks as he scans our items. Oh, yeah, we did. Have you heard of it? I asked, not sure where this is going. Everybody in this town has heard of it. I just haven't heard that name in a while. You kids, we're going up there, we're you. No, we just heard about it the other day and thought it sounded cool is all. I lie, hoping he'll drop it so we can leave. I hold out a $20 bill and he takes it. That's smart. I ain't never heard anything good about that place. Seems like a portal to hell or something from the sounds of it. We grab our items and hear him shout, I've heard of cults and demons. Stay away from there, year. As we quickly made our way through the door. We hopped into the car and began our journey to Hollow Point. I hadn't noticed before, but the last 7 miles or so were a dirt that ventured up the mountain. The sun hadn't even began to set yet, so we decided it was safe. Imaginably, Brandon started getting his camera ready. That was weird. I go into that store all the time, and I've never really heard that old guy talk before. Jake says, puzzled. I'm sure it's nothing. He seemed pretty crazy to me. He probably let all of those Hollow Point stories go to his head. I say, only partially kidding. Yeah, maybe. So what's our story going to be? Said Brandon, trying to change the subject. What? I asked, confused. You know, like a lady killed herself and her kids and now she haunts this place or something. Like we have to have a story for the film. Jesus, dude. I don't think it should be that gruesome for a school project, I say with a laugh. I'm all ears if you got a better story. Can't we just use one of the many stories we heard growing up? Like what? Do you remember any? Because I sure as hell don't. And he was right. It was hard to recall stories. If I'm being honest, people haven't really talked about it much since we were younger. Concentrating, I searched the depths of my mind for any story I had on Hollow Point. None came to mind. And it was quiet for a bit. We were just a few minutes away now, and the only noise in the car was the faint sound of rock music quietly playing over the radio, and Brandon occasionally pressing buttons on his camera. Let's just do a serial killer story or something with a little shack like this. I blurt out, breaking the silence. The cabin came into view just seconds after I said that, and the three of us looked at each other, knowing we had a good location. This was all coming together so nicely. Now all that was left was our favorite part, the production. The little house was about 50 feet from the car, with nothing but tall weeds between us, so I decided to just park it right there on the road. I didn't think anyone would mind. We grabbed our equipment and got extra batteries, water, and some snacks from the trunk and made our way through the unkempt land. As we got closer, it started to look worse and worse. Small details hidden behind tall weeds like broken windows, moss and spots where the wood had begun to rot away came into view. In hindsight, it was a death trap, but we thought it was perfect. We got up to the house, all noticed something, almost in unison. On the front door in black ink was a circle of symbols. I say symbols because there was no way these things were letters or numbers. Whoa, what the hell is that, you guys? Brandon shouts. Dude, relax, it's probably just some kids. Some of them will graffiti anything. They think it makes them look tough or something. I quickly say, trying to calm him down. Brandon takes a deep breath in, followed by a sharp exhale. Yeah, you're probably right. It just surprised me, I guess, he said, realizing he may have overreacted. And like a brick wall, an odor of what smelled like bodies baking in the sun hit us in the face as we entered the small cabin. It was putrid. I don't know how we couldn't smell it from outside. I've smelled shit and vomit before, but nothing even close to whatever this was. Jake whips around and steps outside, emptying the contents of his stomach just outside the door. Brandon right behind him. I follow them outside to get some fresh air and to see if either of them wanted some water. They rinsed their mouths out, drank a bit, and were ready to go a few minutes later. The door being wide open helped with the smell, but it was still nearly unbearable. "Dude, is this project even worth hanging out in that shit smell for a few hours?" Jake said, as he noticed I was heading back in. "Did you want to shoot in that 8 by 8 foot shed Brandon found in town? Because I think this is a far better option." I stare at them waiting for a response. Eventually they both gestured to me that they agreed. We took a second to gather ourselves and started making our way inside. "Wait, what's the story gonna be? Have you thought of a name for this guy yet? All of that would probably help if we actually want to shoot anything today," Jake said, just behind me. I stop in my tracks, one foot in the doorway, and let out a sigh. The three of us stand there, looking at each other, hoping the other one had an answer, so we could just start recording already. After a minute or so, Brandon speaks up. "We could do something like The Butcher. I think the class will like it." The Butcher it is then, and we could say that he brought people out here and cut them up with a butcher knife, and him and his victims haunt this place. Jake replied, ready to get things going. We all agree that the story will work and proceed inside. The place had obviously been abandoned for quite some time. It had a tiny kitchen in one corner with a small bed across from it. In the last one, a small fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. And at the center of all of it was a giant bearskin rug. A thick layer of dust lay on every single inch, showing no sign of recent life. After a minute or two of processing what we were looking at, Jake spoke. "That bear rug is pretty sweet. You think it's real?" I turned to look at him, dumbfounded by the question. "No, I think he bought it," I say sarcastically. "Okay, shut up, man. You can be nice about it." "I'm sorry, but that was pretty dumb," I say, laughing. Jake playfully shoved my arm. "Let's just find a good place to shoot this thing. I don't know how much sunlight we got left today." We quickly agreed on who was going to do each role. Brandon was going to run the main camera, Jake was going to run the other camera and microphone, and I was going to be the host. Of the three, I was probably the most comfortable in front of the camera, so it was a no-brainer. We stepped right outside the cabin and closed the door. We figured this would be the best spot to setting for the start of our project. "Are you ready to become a star?" Brandon says jokingly to me as he gets the camera ready. But he had to say it again because I didn't notice the first time. I was too busy thinking of what I was going to say. I mean, this whole thing was improvised after all. It took them a few minutes to set up, and by the time they were ready, I also felt like I was prepared to start. They both got into position and assured me that they were ready. Feeling confident in myself, I gave them a thumbs up. 5, 4. Brandon says, followed by a countdown on his hand while he mouthed the rest. And then it was time. He mouthed action and signaled with his hand that we were rolling. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first episode of Paranormal Pioneers. I am Dylan, and I will be your host. Today we are at Hollow Point, small cabin just outside of Redacted. It was said to be home of the famous Butcher. He was a crazed serial killer that would chop up his victims with a large butcher knife, and it is said that the ghosts of him and his victims still linger here today. Brandon signed at me that he was satisfied with the take and put the camera down at his side. Paranormal Pioneers, freaking genius, man. It almost sounds like a kid's show, he jokes, trying not to laugh. Well, you guys weren't much help. Besides, I've seen shows on TV with worse titles. Brandon was getting tired, so we decided to call it a day, and I knew it was almost dinner time because my noisy stomach kept reminding me. It turns out you're pretty hungry when you're running on gas station snacks and a 32-ounce of Mountain Dew. I dropped them both off and made my way home. When I got there, I did what I did most nights. I reheated some leftovers and found a good movie to watch. I really looked forward to time with my friends, because I wasn't a big fan of my home life. My father left a long time ago, so it's just my mother and I, and she works a lot, so I don't get to see her very often, and when I did, she was probably sleeping. I went to school the next day, but honestly don't recall anything. I was completely consumed by this project. The final bell of the day rang and we hurried out to the parking lot. I thought you said you were fast. Brandon jokes as he takes off running towards my car. I am. Your mom just insisted that I slow down a bit, for her pleasure. I say with a laugh as I get to my car. We climb in and made our way to the house, talking about the ideas we each had came up with. We arrived and grabbed everything we thought necessary from the car. As we got closer to the front of the house, I noticed something that wasn't there yesterday, and it was definitely man-made. I pointed it out to the guys because it didn't look like they had noticed it. Okay, dude, what the hell? Are we going to find something weird every time we get out here? Jake says, worried. What is that thing? Brandon asks. Jake grabs the small item, pulling it from where it hung to get a better look. Are you sure you should be touching that thing? I asked. I think I can handle it. It looks like something my little sisters would make. He was right. It was a small circle made of sticks, about 6 inches in diameter. In the center was a symbol made of small animal bones. I really hoped they were from an animal, at least. Everything was tied together with long strands of black hair. And the weirdest part was that the symbol in the middle was identical to some of the symbols we had seen on the door. The very idea of this thing and the person who might have made it sent a shiver down my spine. Were we unknowingly trespassing on someone's land? Was this a warning? But my friends and I obviously didn't feel the same way. Are we really gonna let this thing slow us down? Jake drops it on the ground, crushing it under his foot. Besides, like you said, we're close to town, so I'm sure kids are coming over here doing this, just trying to scare someone. Yeah, okay. You're probably right, I say, trying to convince myself that nothing was wrong. We brushed off the incident and decided to continue on. As the guys got the camera set up, I walked around looking for something interesting to use in the video. Something did catch my eye, but I don't think it was going to do our project any good. It was the bed. It hadn't moved or anything, but on it laid a piece of paper, folded in half. It looked like a page from a book. You guys see that? The guys didn't reply with words. Instead, I got my answer from the look on Brandon's face. He was shocked, like he couldn't believe what he was looking at. Yo, Brandon, you there? I asked. He quickly snaps out of his daze and looks at me. Yeah, sorry, I just don't remember that being there yesterday, he says, voice trembling. Yeah, because it wasn't. Jake let out an annoyed sigh and made his way toward the bed. It looks like a page from a Bible or something, but I don't recognize this language. He picked it up and opened it, and just a second after he did, a drop of fresh blood dripped from the page onto the floor. Is that what I think it is? Brandon asked, a terrified look on his face. Guys, look. Jake flipped the page our way, revealing the word leave written on it in a very sloppy handwriting. It's probably just some homeless guy. I cut him off. No, man. We can't keep saying it's a homeless person. Have you ever seen a homeless guy in Redacted? Because I haven't. I've lived here my whole life and can't recall ever seeing anybody go homeless. Jake dropped the paper, a confused look on his face. He knew I was right, but didn't want to face the truth. And this wasn't one of you. Like playing a prank or something. A prank? Dude, when was the last time any of us pranked each other? And if I did, I wouldn't do some weird shit like this. When do you guys want to just do this tomorrow? I'm not really in the mood today, honestly. Brandon finally spoke. Yeah, I think that's enough for one day. Fake or not, I do not like that note. So we hopped into my car and blasted rock music, trying to drown out the voices in our head pestering us with thoughts of what we had just witnessed. I had finally begun to think of something else when Jake spoke. That blood, or paint, or whatever it was really fresh. I mean, it was wet enough to drip on the ground. A violent shiver went down my spine. I didn't know what to say. Finally, Brandon broke the silence. How long do you think it was there for? And was it meant for us? We didn't want to talk about it, but it was the only thing we could think about, so we sat in silence the rest of the trip. The next day at lunch, I grabbed my food and made my way toward our usual table. When I got there, Brandon put down his burger to speak. Okay, now that you're both here, I want to talk about what happened yesterday. Okay, I say, already not liking where this is going. I took a picture of the page that we found and showed it to my mom. She said the language was Latin. She actually has an old small Bible in Latin. She showed it to me. She said everybody in this town has been handing them down to their firstborn kids for generations. Really? Jake, are either of your parents the oldest sibling? I asked. No, I don't think so. You have an uncle that's older than your mom, right? Jake asks. Yeah, we don't talk to him much though. He works a ton. Look, all I'm saying is that a Bible in Latin isn't a weird thing around here, okay? Brandon blurts out. Okay, yeah. And what about the wet blood? It's fake blood, man. I asked my mom and she said that Stan sells fake blood around Halloween. She showed me some that she bought a few years ago when I wanted to be a zombie. He replied, his tone implying that it should have been obvious. Okay, sure. Even if that's true, why was it fresh enough to drip? Are these people following us out there to do this crap? Yeah, I can't explain that part. I didn't get much sleep last night. As soon as Jake got done speaking, the bell rang. The next few days were very productive. We didn't get any more footage, but we got most of our editing done. We didn't even really bring up going back out there. Unable to process everything, we shied away from the unknown. It was the final week of our project, and we had edited everything that we had shot. We were stuck unless we went back out there. We all agreed to it and made our way there after school. Let's just get this started already. We barely got anything done last time we were out here. Jake whined as we pulled up to the cabin. We grabbed just the essentials and fought our way through the tall weeds once more. We did some retakes, and I walked around pointing out anything that looked odd while I slowly created this fictional serial killer. We had just finished up a take and Jake asks, "I think we're good in here. Could we possibly get some shots of the exterior?" The sun was just about to go down, so we wrapped things up and started doing a lap around the outside. When we got to the back, we noticed something. A basement door. Like one of those where you gotta lift the doors up. How had we not noticed that yet? This place was already pretty creepy, so I was afraid of how much creepier this basement might be. "Oh shit," Jake shouts from behind us, making me jump. "You guys down to go in there? If we want a good movie, we gotta get some shots down there. That could be where the killings took place," Brandon says, as they both made their way towards the doors. "Wait guys, are you sure this is a good idea?" Brandon turns to me. "What's the matter, Dylan? Are you afraid?" he says in a mocking tone. "Don't you guys remember the note that was here last time? Doesn't it concern you at all that whoever left that behind might be down there?" Jake walks up to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Hey man, relax, you're right. Things have been pretty weird, but think of how awesome a quick shot down there would be. We could prop both doors open to let some light in, okay?" I looked down, face in my hand, and let out a sigh. I really didn't want to do this, but I knew the guys wouldn't let it go now. This place was my idea after all, and I knew that they would probably bring that up. "Look guys, it's starting to get dark. Could we just do this part tomorrow?" I asked, praying my friends would agree. Maybe doing it right after school will make things a little less creepy, and besides, I don't feel like meeting whoever left that really creepy note behind last time. "That's not a bad idea. I'm freezing my ass off too, so remember to bring a jacket tomorrow," Brandon says, shutting the camera off. "Yeah, okay. That's probably smart," Jake agrees. We all climbed into my car and made our way home. If I could go back in time and stop us right here, I would. The next day was a typical day. Coasting though all of the boring stuff, waiting for last period. Thinking of ideas for the movie really helped to pass the time though. We spent most of class that day editing. We talked a little about ideas for the basement, but decided we could do that in the car later. Jake had me stop at another gas station in town that day, just a little out of our way because someone at school told him that they don't ask for ID. I don't think it was true though, because he came out with a Red Bull and a look of disappointment on his face. He climbs in the car, looking defeated. "Let me guess, they carded you." Obviously they carded me, man. She didn't even scan the thing. She was just glaring at me like it was obvious or something. "Of course it's obvious, Jake. You're 18 and you look 14. I say, joking. I heard Brandon laugh from the backseat while Jake sipped from his Red Bull, probably hoping we'll just drop it. I put some music on and we headed towards the house. We got there and made our way toward the back. There it was again. As we passed the front of the house, I noticed it hanging there. It was identical to the little thing Jake stomped on a couple weeks back. "Okay, what the hell? You guys remember me breaking that thing, right?" Jake says as he notices it. "I don't like that. This is getting way too weird, you guys," Brandon says, petrified. Without saying a word, I made my way toward the object. As I approached it, I looked down. The other one was still there, broken and untouched. Was it better or worse that they left this one alone? I wasn't sure. I felt sick to my stomach. Jake walks past me and pushes the front door open, freezing in his tracks right there in the doorway. I noticed the look on his face and decided I should see whatever he was looking at. It was the wall this time. The word leave accompanied by phrases of Latin and more of the symbols, written on the wall across from us. It was just as fresh as the note, with visible drips making their way down the wall from each sloppy letter. How much more of this shit can we blame on kids? They have to be some pretty fucked up kids if they're doing stuff like this. If this is a joke or something, they've taken it way too far, Jake finally says, his voice trembling. I don't think kids are doing this. We need to figure out what these symbols are. They're everywhere. We took some pictures and decided it was probably best to do something else. I think we were too on edge to do any shooting that day, especially if the guys still felt like exploring the basement. So I dropped them off and spent the night looking into the mysterious symbols we kept running into. It was almost midnight before I realized the time. I felt like someone was messing with us, because I couldn't find anything on them. I didn't know what was more believable, that someone made up all of this up, or that we actually happened to stumble upon an unknown language in this small cabin, just outside of an isolated logging town. The guys didn't have any luck either. We spent lunch figuring out a plan for that night. We decided the library might have a book on it. We looked through every one they had on languages, ancient civilizations, just anything we could think of that may be relevant. Guys, I just translated the Latin we found on the wall. Brandon says, an uncomfortable look on his face. What does it say? The longest one translated to, if you visit this place, where the creature dwell, you'll be sacrificed and sent to hell. That's fun, I say nervously. I've never heard anything so creepy before in my life. This doesn't make any freaking sense, Jake finally says, annoyed. What? Any of it. None of this makes sense, man. If is this real, how the hell did a language manage to hide from human history in freaking rural, redacted, and now this too? He says, frustrated, trying to remain quiet. Excuse me, gentlemen, we hear from behind us. The library is closing in a couple of minutes. You are going to have to leave soon. We were running out of ideas. It was like this language didn't exist. But how was that possible? Nothing can hide from the internet nowadays, yet these symbols managed to do so. I dropped them off and made my way home. I didn't sleep that night. I tried, I just couldn't. Something about that mystery language hidden from history all these years scared the crap out of me. And that message, what was that about? The guys were unusually quiet at lunch the next day, but I don't blame them. I didn't feel like talking much myself. I couldn't stop thinking about the message on the wall. Brandon and Jake couldn't either. We spent the next couple of days editing. I think it was just to put off having to go back out to that place.
We were almost done, but didn't have enough to fill an hour. This was a big problem because none of us wanted to go back there. And an even bigger problem. We're almost out of time, so we had to finish this thing. It was too late to start a new project.
8 minutes, Jake says, looking at our movie in the editing software. 8 freaking minutes. 8 minutes can feel like an eternity when you're as uncomfortable as we were last time we visited that place. We didn't have a choice though. We needed to finish this project. 8 minutes isn't so bad, right? We could go right after school and get it done. If you don't mess up, we could be in and out in like 15 minutes. Brandon says. I think he was trying to be funny, but it wasn't working. Even after everything we've seen, you guys aren't worried at all about what we saw last time. They both looked at me. It was a dumb idea, but I knew we'd end up doing it anyways. We had to finish this project. It was a big part of our grade and would be the first official film we ever made. They spent the rest of the period trying to convince me, and I eventually cracked and said yes. We were all scared, but deep down I think we felt the same way, just excited to see our film completed. After class, we headed straight for the car. We didn't talk much on the way there. I don't know about them, but I was terrified of what we may find this time. My mind felt like it was going a million miles an hour, running through every possibility of what may be waiting for us out there. It took me a couple of minutes to get out of the car. Killing the engine as we pulled up, I sit there trying to justify another trip out to this place. I didn't know it yet, but this would be the last day of my friends' lives. Hey man, are you ready to get this over with? Jake says, a look of concern on his face. I sat there for another second or so, mustering up the courage to open the car door. Yeah, I think I'm good now. Let me just grab something real quick. I pop the trunk and head to the back of the car. As the guys got the cameras ready, I grabbed a couple of small crowbars. I knew it wasn't much, but I felt the need to buy something to defend myself after our last trip out here. They might make the guys feel better, too. I hand one to Brandon and put the other one in the side pocket of my backpack. Just in case. Just in case of what? Brandon says, confused. What do you expect to happen today? After our last few trips out here, I'm not really sure what to expect anymore, if I'm being honest. Better safe than sorry, I guess, though. Brandon's face changed almost immediately after I said that. He looked so uncomfortable. I can't blame him, though. I felt the same way. I think I was just doing a better job of hiding it. We stood there in silence for a bit, and then made our way towards the back of the house. I noticed that thing was still hanging by the front door. That's probably a good sign, right? It means nobody has been out here since we were here last. We made it to the back and noticed something on the basement doors. A giant X and a couple of the symbols we kept seeing. Of course, man, we can't go one freaking time without finding something weird, can we? Jake says, already getting tired of this. Let's just leave. We can find something else to fill in those 8 minutes. Dude, don't you remember? We basically left off in the middle of a scene. We have to finish this thing here, or it isn't going to look right. Brandon says, looking at Jake, waiting for him to agree. He's right. We only need 8 minutes. Let's just get it done and get out of here. We'll be on our way home in 15 minutes, dude, Jake says to me, hoping to change my mind. I stared at them for a while in disbelief. Did they really want to go down there for a school project? Can't we finish it up inside the house? There's got to be something else we can talk about in there. We have an hour of content from that small shack. That's enough. And besides, they'll want to see the basement if we mention it to anyone. Jake says, still hoping to win me over. So then don't mention it to anyone. I don't want to go down in that death trap, I yell. Jake lets out a deep sigh and looks at me. Would it make you feel better if I went down there and checked it out? I got the light on my phone. Besides, I doubt it, that's big. He wasn't going to drop it. They were going to finish this thing in that basement, with or without me. I decided that if they were going down there, I was going to join them. I've known these guys my whole life, and if I left now and something happened to them, the guilt would kill me. I stood there, looking at the ground, silent. I wanted to prolong this moment as long as I possibly could. We had no idea what we were about to see, and that terrified me. I really wish I could have talked the guys out of it. Well, want me to check it out real quick? Jake asks, after giving me a few minutes of think. I take a deep breath in and let out a large exaggerated exhale. I needed Jake to know that I thought this was a bad idea. Just be careful, Jake, please. I got a bad feeling about this place. Jake remained calm and collected, or he looked that way, at least. I know he was probably shitting bricks right about now. He nodded to us and set his backpack on the ground. Handing me the camera, he pulled his phone from his pocket with the other hand. Seriously, guys, don't worry, I'll be fine. Would it make you feel better if I called you so we could talk while I'm down there? Brandon and I looked at each other, knowing this would probably help calm us down a bit. Yeah, sure, I like that idea. You can tell us what you see, I say, speaking for both of us. We made our way over and took one final glance at each other. Brandon and Jake each grab a door and pull them open. I think we found the source of that awful smell, because it was a lot worse down here. I thank God I was standing that far away, because they practically stuck their faces into it. The smell was so strong they both stumbled backwards, Jake falling on his ass. Oh my God, Jake yells, nearly vomiting. I didn't think that smell could get any worse. Brandon yells, now covering his face with his shirt. I helped Jake up, and Brandon grabbed his phone. He must have tossed it when he fell. Thanks, he says. No problem. Do you really feel like going in there still, though? Jake stared at me for a bit. I could tell he was thinking. Do you still have your gym clothes in your car? Yeah, I say, confused by where this might be going. Get me your shirt. I'd appreciate it if it didn't stink like BO, he says with a smirk on his face. A little BO after gym class is normal. Besides, it beats those axe baths you take. It's like you're trying to bug bomb the locker room every day, or something. Brandon let out a small laugh, and Jake sat silent. He'd never admit it, but I think even he knew that I had won this one. I walked to my car and grabbed a clean gym shirt. When I got back, Jake had a YouTube tutorial up, teaching him how to tie the shirt around his face like a ninja mask. He insisted that it was going to help, but I had my doubts. He got it on and called my phone. Brandon and I remained right next to the door as he climbed down into what looked like a black void. Jake was very brave, because I would never go down there alone. Holy shit, it is so freaking dark down here, he says, just a second after we heard his feet hit the ground through my phone. It took you a while to get down there. How far down do you think it is? I'm not sure, but it's got to be pretty far down because it is pitch black in here. Look down. Brandon and I stick our heads in, spotting Jake's phone light. He was right, it was probably 25 feet down. I've never seen a basement this deep. Brandon and I sat there, waiting for him to say something. You see anything yet, Jake? No. It's pretty creepy, but I'm not seeing anything too crazy. He's quiet for a second, and then speaks again. Whoa, okay. I think I found something. It looks like an altar, maybe. An altar? You think you just found an altar in this basement? I say in disbelief. Guys, this place is huge, he says, completely ignoring my question, sounding terrified. How big could it possibly be? I'm scared to find out. It looks like there's a whole church down here. Okay, dude, you're starting to freak me out. Just get out of there so we can leave. I'm serious, man. I found bathrooms, an altar, and like 4 rows of pews. Come on, Jake, just get out of there. I don't like this. I stuck my head inside the doors, but he was too far away. I couldn't hear anything. How big was this place? I wish there was some freaking lights down here. It's like walking around in a Walmart with a blindfold on. The silence was broken by loud thuds and the sound of wood breaking over my phone. You all right, Jake? Yeah, I'm fine, We hear another loud thud followed by a grunt. Trying to kick this door down. He replies. What? Why? I'd leave it alone? I doubt that's the way out. You got any better ideas? Because I'm fucking lost, dude. It's been at least 5 minutes since I've seen the ladder. Trying to be quick, I come up with an idea. Hey, Jake, Just look for my light, okay? I'm going to stick my phone down there and wave it around. Keep an eye out for it. As I turned my light on, we heard one more thud. It was followed by what sounded like a 2x4 snapping. I got it, guys. I got the door open. Jake yells, an odd amount of excitement in his voice. Leave that door alone. I don't want you to get even more lost. Just look for my light, man. Please. I stick the top half of my body down into the hole, trying to give Jake the best possible chance of seeing me. As I waved the light around, I yelled his name, but he could only hear my voice over the phone. That comparison he made to Walmart creeped back into my memory, and I became terrified with the possibility of how big this place might actually be. How were we going to get him out? He couldn't see us, and he could only hear us over the phone. He must have been a ways in too, because his phone was starting to occasionally cut out. What was that? Jake randomly yells, terrified. What is it? What do you see, Jake? I don't see anything, but I'm hearing shit, he says in a soft tone, almost as if he's trying to whisper. What did it sound like? Like a really low growl, kinda. It sounded pissed off. And oh my god, I can hear it again. It sounds close. I'm gonna crawl under this overturned pew. He was right. The growl was a hauntingly low, guttural growl. It eventually went away, followed by rustling and the labored breathing of our best friend. He was silent for a bit. It could have been seconds or minutes, all I know is it felt like an eternity. He finally spoke. Guys, I haven't heard anything for a bit. I'm going to look around and see if I can find that door I came in. Jake peeks out from under the pew. I don't see anything, you guys. I'm going to look for that door. He sits up when he suddenly feels something cold drip from above and land in his hair. What was that? And before we could respond, Jake looked up hoping to find the source when another drop landed on his upper lip, most of it getting into his mouth. Oh my god, it's blood. A drop just fell into my mouth and it tastes like fucking dirty pennies, he shouts. Relax, Jake. You have to keep quiet. There's something down there with you, remember? I shout. Brandon next to me petrified, not moving a muscle. He was silent again. I didn't want to say anything and give his location away, so I decided to wait until he spoke. A few minutes went by. All we could hear was Jake struggling to find his way through this labyrinth with little to no sight. God damn it, he whispers. What's going on, man? You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. My phone is just at 10%, so I don't know how much longer I can use my light. I could hear the fear in his voice. It's okay, Jake. Just look for that door. Have you found it yet? Not yet. I think I'm getting close. Oh my ... no. This can't be real. What the fuck is this place? Jake shouts. What is it, Jake? What do you see? He began to cry. It was a minute or so before he was able to speak. Holding back tears, he said, there's like 20 dead bodies down here. They're all in matching robes. It looks like they've been dead for a while. I let him cry a bit before speaking. Okay, Jake. I know this is going to sound impossible, but you just have to stay calm, okay? Just keep quiet and focus on finding your way out of there. Have you found the door yet? He takes a few deep breaths, calming himself down. In a soft, defeated tone, he finally said, yeah. I see a door, but I don't even know if that's the one I came in, though. You had to kick it down, didn't you? I think you'd be able to tell if it was the right door, or not. I say half kidding, hoping a little humor might help. All I heard was sniffling, and the sound of Jake wiping the tears from his face with his sleeve. These fucking symbols, man, I just want to go home, he yelled, his voice trembling. The symbols are down there, too. They're fucking everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, and even the freaking ceiling. I'm pretty sure that door had one on it, too. The door. Did you find the door you kicked open? I asked. He began to cry, struggling to get out. I hear it again. It's back. I don't know where to hide, and that thing is back. I went to say something, but he shushed me, and as soon as he did, I shut the hell up. The next word out of my word could get my friend killed. I gave the phone to Brandon and put my head back down into the hole, hoping to hear whatever Jake was talking about. But it was silent. It was way too quiet for all of this to be going on. What the fuck? What even are you? Jake yells, followed by the sound of him getting up and running, stumbling into things as he tries to escape whatever he just saw. He made it sound like it was from out of this world. Whatever it was, this was probably what Jake imagined when he thought of a demon. He quit running. I think he fell. A sobbing voice came over the phone. It was Jake. Guys, please tell my parents that I love them. Just tell them that I love them, okay? Tell him that I'm sorry for being a fuck up. I never meant to dissat. Shut up, I yell, cutting him off. Don't talk that way. You're going to be just fine. I'm sure you're close to the exit. It's close, and I don't know where to go. This fucking room is empty, he says, trying not to cry. A few of the longest seconds of my life passed before we heard our best friend beg and plead for his life. No, please. Please, just let me live. I'm just a kid. Please, I'm just a kid. Nuo. He suddenly went silent. I still can't believe what happened next. The ground below our feet trembled. Whatever just happened down there caused the ground to shake. It was immediately followed by what I can only assume was his body hitting the ground. Jake, are you okay? I yell, but the only response I got was the sound of my best friend choking on his own blood. Dylan, what are we going to do, man? He's freaking dying? Brandon yells, shaking me. I froze. I had no idea what to do. I was just staring at my phone screen, unable to process what was happening. Then Jake hung up on me. His phone must have died. What just happened? Call him back. I tried, but I knew what was going to happen. It went straight to voicemail. This was the only form of communication we had with Jake, and it was gone. Brandon hurried over to the basement doors, sticking the top half of his body inside. Jake, can you hear me? He yells, stopping for a second, hoping to hear a response. But there was nothing. Dylan, I hear. I look up to see Brandon staring at me. He was as white as a ghost, zero emotion on his face. Do you hear that? We continued to stare at each other, completely silent. I held my breath, listening for anything. And then I heard it. Jake was right. It was a hauntingly deep growl. It sounded like a giant lion straight out of hell or something. And it must have been getting close because the ground began to tremble beneath our feet again. Grab our shit and run, Brandon. Get to the car. I'll be right behind you, I yell, running over to the basement doors. Grabbing the crowbar from my bag, I slam the doors shut and use it to jam them shut. I turned around and took off like a bat out of hell towards my car. Brandon beat me to it and pulled on the passenger door handle. It was locked. Fuck. Running for my life. I reach into my jacket pocket trying to get my keys. I pulled them out as soon as I got to the car, frantically trying to unlock my door. I was shaking so much that it was nearly impossible. I managed to calm myself down a bit and got the door open. Brandon and I hopped into the car and I started it. I thought my car was dead for a second though, because the roar of that thing drowned out the sound of my engine. I put the car into gear and sped off. We drove off into the wrong direction, but it didn't matter, as long as we were driving away from that little piece of hell on earth that just took the life of our best friend. I wish we had gone the right way though, because the demon was still chasing us. We couldn't see anything, but we could feel its presence, even from inside the car. I looked down and noticed that I'm going almost 55 miles an hour on this dirt road. Next thing we know, something took out the front tire and the car rolled. It must have rolled a half dozen times. I honestly can't recall. I was almost immediately knocked out when it happened. I came back into consciousness when I noticed him. I don't think Brandon put his seatbelt on. He didn't look good. Brandon, come on buddy, you okay? I yell, shaking his lifeless body. But I knew it was too late. I must have been out for a while because he was ice cold. I lay there on my back on the ceiling of my overturned car. I couldn't get my door open. Damn it. God freaking damn it, I yell as I kicked the windshield out. It finally gave. I got onto my stomach and crawled out, making my way through the broken glass. My head was spinning. I felt my temple. Glancing at my hand, I noticed blood. I looked in both directions and noticed the path to my left went down the mountain. I took off in a full-on sprint. I knew it was towards this demon, but it was also towards Satefy. I'm pretty sure I broke a rib. The pain of running was unbearable, but it was definitely better than dying. I ran for a while. Dehydrated and out of breath, I wanted to walk for a bit, but then I saw it. The place that took Jake and Brandon. I took off running again, crying as I ran past this real-life nightmare. I noticed something on the road. It was Brandon's phone. I lost mine in the accident, so maybe I could use his to call somebody. I bent over, grabbing it without stopping. I didn't want to spend any more time around this place. I ran another quarter mile or so before stopping. I tried a few typical funny passwords I assumed Brandon might have used, but none of them worked. I felt hopeless until I put in 4 zeros. His phone finally unlocked. I punch in my mom's phone number, so thankful that she made me memorize it all those years ago. I put the phone up to my ear. She answers. Hello, Mom? I say, frantically checking my surroundings, making sure I'm alone. Oh, hi, honey. You're out late. Did your phone die? No, Mom. I wrecked my car. Jake and Brandon are dead. Something killed them. You have to come get me. I yell, failing to hold back my tears. Oh my. Okay, just tell me where you are, okay? She says, stunned by what she had just heard. I explained to her where I was while I continued jogging, praying for any sight of asphalt. I was still a couple of miles away from any real road when her car finally came into view. I spotted her lights before she had noticed me. Speeding up, my mom pulls up next to me, slamming on her brakes, with the passenger window already down, and yells, "Hurry, honey. Get in the car." But I hop in, and as soon as I do, my mom took off into reverse, stopping only when she knew she had enough room, before peeling out in the gravel towards town. I could hear that growl again. "Oh my God, what is that?" my mom yells. She could hear it too. "Just get out of here, okay, Mom? Just get off of this dirt road as fast as you can, please," I shout. Shortly after, the paved road came into view, and as soon as our tires hit that asphalt, the growl began to subside, almost as if the beast was trapped on this mountain just outside of my hometown. With the police on the phone, my mom made her way to the hospital. We had made it. We pulled up to the ER, and I must have looked terrible because 2 people met me just outside of the car with a stretcher. I laid down, crying, mourning the loss of my friends while they pulled me inside. I spent a couple of days in the hospital because my injuries were worse than I thought. A concussion, a broken rib, and a dislocated shoulder, along with way too many stitches on my stomach, face, and left shin. I told the police about what happened that day, and they sent out a team of 4 sheriff deputies to check it out. After a disturbing interaction over the radio, none of them were even heard or seen again. The 2 police cruisers they drove out there even disappeared. The city hasn't really talked about that place much since all this happened. Last I heard, they said something about a controlled burn. All they've done, though, is rope the mountain off with police tape and put up signs on trees around its base, warning people of the unknown dangers that lie ahead. Somebody must be up there, though, keeping that thing at bay, because the police noticed dozens of those small wards we saw hanging from about half the trees surrounding the cabin. Mr. Peterson gave me an extension on the project, but I asked for a different request. I asked him if I could edit and turn in the 52-minute-long episode of Paranormal Pioneers I had made with Jake and Brandon, and he eagerly agreed. "That sounds like a swell idea, Dylan, and we have to make sure their parents get to see it," he says, trying to not cry in front of one of his students. The final was due just a couple days later on Friday, and I was very proud of what I had made. What we made. It's something to remember my best friends by, and I will cherish it forever. Mr. Peterson gave me a perfect grade. After class, he actually mentioned that he wished he could have given me more than 100% for being able to do this, despite what I had been through. Jake and Brandon's parents decided to do one big celebration of life for them the next day. They thought it would be a good idea to premiere the episode of Paranormal Pioneers there, and everybody loved it. Honestly, I guess it feels good knowing some good came out of all of this. I just wish I had my friends back. Or at least, even some answers, like whatever the hell that thing is out there. And did Jake set it free when he kicked that door in? My mind infected with thoughts that I did not like. Anytime I brought up the Bibles with someone in town, they'd just brush it off and tell me that it's nothing I should worry about. The end. Thank you for reading. I appreciate you. Story number 2. It was a cold, rainy day in December. There was less than a week until we got out of school for winter break. Usually my teachers don't give us work before a break, but my bastard of a history teacher decided he'd assign us a 2,000-word report due the day before we got out. I knew I wasn't going to be there, then I was going up to the mountains in North Carolina to spend Christmas and New Year's in Lenoir with some old friends I hadn't seen since I moved. So in other words, I had to turn in the report a few days prior, as in that day. So, deciding I'd get started, I found a book one thought would help me, and sat down at a table with my laptop so I could begin my report. After what seemed like forever, I finished my report and printed it out. I went to go get my paper from the printer, and when I got back, I noticed a small black book sitting on top of my laptop, which was now closed. This was strange. Not so much that someone was messing with my stuff, because that was common at my school. It was just that the printer I used was just across the room, and I didn't see anyone walking anywhere near the table I was at. Another thing I found strange was that nobody else seemed to notice it. Not that I'm ever exactly the center of attention, but if you saw a book appear seemingly out of nowhere onto someone's computer, wouldn't you at least raise an eyebrow? Anyways, I could feel that something was off about the book, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I decided to take it home with me. It was only until later that I realized what a hell of a mistake that was. I quickly went to my teacher to turn in my assignment, then left the building, and began walking towards my apartment. Yeah, I know it might be strange for a junior in high school to live in his own apartment, but my parents divorced when I was 13 because my mother used to abuse me, so living with my father was my only option. My father comes from a rather wealthy family, and living with him was great until he died in a car crash on his way back home from a business trip when I was 15. I was sad, of course, but I didn't have any time for moping. I had to figure out my living situation first. I already decided that it would be a cold day in hell before I moved back in with my mother, so I had nowhere to go. Luckily, my grandmother was kind enough to let me live with her until I was old enough to move out. Because I started school so late, I turned 18 at the start of this school year. So with the money my father left me, I rented an apartment of my own and have been living there since. Anyways, when I got home, curiosity overcame me and I grabbed the book from my bag and looked at it. It was dusty and obviously very old. The book was black and the spine and edges of it were weathered and beaten. Filled with renewed curiosity, I opened the book. The first thing I noticed when I opened the book was that there was an inscription on the back of the front cover, which read to the reader, "Do not read." I thought that was rather strange, as I didn't understand how a person could read something without actually reading it. But, as any careless person my age would, I didn't take heed to the alleged warning and proceeded to turn to the first page. As soon as I saw what was on the first page, or more accurately, what wasn't, I was slightly taken aback, if that's even the right word for it. I turned to the next page. Still nothing. Same thing with the next page, and the next. After fruitlessly flipping through the pages and seeing absolutely nothing on all of them, I closed the book and decided I would try to return the book to the library the next day. For now, I needed sleep. So I went to my bedroom and went to sleep. I had a strange dream. In it, the book was floating in front of my face, and the pages were flipping like crazy, and a strange voice was telling me, "I warned you," over and over. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded as though it had multiple voices, like you would expect a demon to sound in a horror movie, and it had no regular rhythm to it. It didn't sound human. The pages in the book stopped flipping at a page somewhere in the middle of the book. Black ink droplets began to rain down onto the page from a pen, whose holder was invisible to me. The ink droplets began to form letters, which formed two words. When the floating pen finished its statement, I read it. The page bore large, bold letters, which spelled out the words, "Now suffer." After that, I woke up. I hadn't had a nightmare since I was 10, so this was odd. The air around me felt tense, like when you think something bad is about to happen. I waited a few minutes before laying back down and attempting to go back to sleep. After a while, I did. Luckily, I didn't have the nightmare again, but I can't say that my next dream was exactly great either. I was in my home, my old one, and my parents were there. They were happy, which was strange, as before their divorce, they were always either fighting or simply not talking to each other. My father walked over to my mother and hugged her, then kissed her on her forehead, before walking across the room and doing the same to me. He announced that he was off to work, and he grabbed his keys and headed out the door. That's when things got even stranger. My mother turned to look at me, with a twisted smile on her face. I was worried about what she might do to me. Would she abuse me again? She moved closer to me, and I flinched. Then she opened her mouth and spoke. "So how have you been, sweetie?" she said, her voice low and full of affection. She sounded distant. I've been great, Mom," I stammered out, my voice shaky. I was still unsure of whether I could actually trust her or not. She smiled warmly at me and said, "Well, that's good. But you won't be for much longer," a deep voice said, shocking me. I was paralyzed with fear as the realization hit me. It was the same voice I had heard in the other dream. My mother didn't react to the sudden stream of words, but she began to speak again. This time her voice was strange, and she moved closer to me with every word she said, her smile twisted. "I warned you, human," she said, her voice growing progressively deeper with each word she said. When it reached the same pitch as the voice from before, she began to speak the familiar words I had heard before. "Now suffer." I shot upright, breathing heavily, my shirt sticking to my back. I looked over to my nightstand. On it, next to my alarm clock, rested that damn book. Though I knew it was just a dream, a sudden impulse drove me to grab the book, and I began frantically flipping through the pages. After seeing that all the pages were blank, I flopped back down onto my bed and sighed loudly. "I have to get rid of that book. I have to," I muttered to myself. After deciding I wasn't going back to sleep, I vowed to take the book back to the library the next day. After laying down, staring at the ceiling for several minutes, I reached out and grabbed my phone off of the nightstand. I clicked the power button once to turn the screen on and opened up my phone's web browser. I searched the internet for anyone who might have had the same issue as I am. I doubted I would find anyone, but with all that's been happening since yesterday, I decided it was worth a try. After searching the web for what felt like hours, I came across a website called creepypasta.com. I was confused at first. What the hell was a creepypasta? I decided to click the link. I soon discovered that creepypasta.com was a website that contained several horror stories, which from what I had gathered were called creepypastas. There were tales of a mysterious tall man called Slenderman and a psychotic murderer called Jeff. There were also many other stories, such as encounters with various other creatures, such as the rake, but none that matched the same symptoms as what I was going through. Flustered, I threw my phone down and put my hands over my face. What the hell was I going to do? I didn't want to face those terrible nightmares again, but I couldn't just not sleep, right? Damn it. I said. It was then that I got the feeling that someone or something was watching me. Damn, what a voice said from behind me. I whipped my head around to see who was speaking, but saw nothing. This wouldn't be happening to you if you had obeyed my warning. Boy W, where are you? I stuttered, shaking in my seat. I can tell you are feeble-minded. What do you mean from the way you act after only a few nightmares? You'll never make it through what's coming. How do you know that? Are you the thing that was talking to me in my dreams? No, but I am one who can help you after hearing that. I relaxed a bit, but I was still nervous. How, I asked. By opening the book, you have agreed to the rules of the game, the voice said, dodging my question. Game? What game? What are you talking about? I stammered. You will know. In time. Farewell. For now, no. Wait, but I could feel that whatever had been talking to me was gone. I didn't feel its presence anymore. That night, I vowed that I wouldn't sleep. But at around 2 a.m., my eyes became heavy, and I found myself drifting off. I slept fitfully, odd dreams plaguing my mind as I rested. At around 3:15 a.m., I woke up to a loud crash that sounded like it was from my kitchen. I froze, fear beginning to eat away at the corner of my mind. After a while, I regained the ability to move. Everything was still and silent, but the air felt tense, like last night, after my first nightmare. I rose to my feet, and quickly, but silently, crept over to the corner of my closet, where I grabbed the wooden baseball bat I kept in the corner of my room. Afterwards, I opened my door as quietly as I could and crept through the hallway of my apartment, baseball bat at the ready. As I approached the kitchen, I began to hear a soft whoosh sound, like the pages of an old book turning. As I reached the kitchen, I saw that nothing had been destroyed, or even touched for that matter. I began to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing, then I saw it. It was the book. It sat on the countertop, but I know that I left it on my nightstand. If that wasn't bizarre enough, its pages were flipping, as if wind were rustling through it, but none of the windows were open. Even if they were, there was no wind blowing outside. I backed away, slowly. Suddenly I began to feel cold, but it wasn't like a winter cold. It was as though I was being chilled to the very core, within my soul itself. I began shivering uncontrollably, while I crossed my arms over my chest in a pathetic attempt to warm myself from the sudden, unforgivable cold. Then a voice began to speak. At first it sounded like really loud wind, but after a while I began to hear words from the noise, like a person whispering. I made out the word sacrifice. You must make sacrifice. Sacrifice, I repeated under my breath. Surprisingly, the voice heard me and gave a chilling response of yes. Who, what are you? I asked the voice. I am the game master, came the reply. Game master. Game? What game? What the hell is going on? I said, my voice shaky. All games have rules, and you agreed to mine. Now you will play my game by those rules. You are my pawn, now. Pawn? It was like my life had been turned into a board game, but I still had no idea what rules the thing was talking about. How can I obey something I know nothing of? Now sacrifice must be made. What sacrifice? As a pawn in my game, you are after the prize. In order to obtain such a prize, you must win the game. Win the game, and you will obtain that which you desire most. Well, How exactly do I win the game? Sacrifice will be made, said the voice. What if I don't play your game? What if I don't want to obey your rules, I said. I wouldn't do that, the voice replied, with an edge to its voice that sent chills down my spine. If it was trying to intimidate me, it had definitely done its job. I guess I had no choice but to play the thing's game, but sacrifice? What kind of sacrifice? And what did I desire most? This was all just so confusing. Suddenly, a wave of nausea nearly knocked me down, and I found myself immensely exhausted. I decided I would try to get some sleep and figure out the rest tomorrow. For the rest of the night, I didn't have any nightmares, or at least none that I remember. When I woke up in the morning, I stretched and followed the almost instinctual routine of reaching over to my nightstand to grab my phone. When my hand reached where I had placed the phone the night before, however, my hand made contact with a small, rectangular object. Curious and slightly confused, I looked over, and my eyes were met with the sight of the black book one had grown familiar with over the past few days. I jerked my hand away and stared at the book, horrified. Any confusion or fear I had felt before paled in comparison to how I felt now. It wasn't as if strange things hadn't already been happening recently, but I knew for a fact that I left the book on the counter the night before. I decided I was going to try to return the book to the library where I had found it, so I groggily climbed out of bed and put on a pair of jeans, then slipped on some shoes and grabbed my keys off my nightstand. I reached over to grab the book, but when my hand made contact with it, a shock ran through my body, like if you were to put a screwdriver in an electrical outlet. My hand touching the book started to burn, as if my whole hand was completely submerged in a pot of boiling water. Once again, I jerked my hand away from the book and held my scorched hand up to my face. To my surprise, however, my hand was not burned at all. The pain subsided, and the voice from last night came to me. There was anger in its voice. You agreed to the rules of my game, and you will play by them. There is no escaping the fate which you have brought upon yourself, just as a pawn may only move where the holder of the piece moves it. I felt the color drain from my face, and I turned in the direction I thought I heard the voice from, but to no avail. Nothing was there but the closed door of my bedroom. I heard the deep-voiced laughter of the game master, and chills ran down my spine at the sound. You may only see me if I reveal myself to you, just as mortals will never see their god, and were I to reveal myself to you, you would go insane, and that would kill the fun before it even began. I stood there, speechless. The voice laughed again, but it was less full of malice this time. It sounded like a person does when they are praising their pets for doing something good.
Good, good, my pawn. Now, rest up, for the game will truly begin tomorrow.
I was about to protest, as I had just woken up and had things to do. However, as I began to speak, a wave of nausea, then exhaustion came over me. I felt lightheaded and stumbled backwards, my vision blurred. I fell back onto my bed, and my eyes closed. I fell asleep instantly. That night, my dream was of the voice. It was, again, telling me the rules, but it sounded less like it was directed at me and more like it was addressing an audience. Also, for the entirety of the dream, I was floating in a completely black area, entirely submerged in shadows. I looked around, and upon closer inspection, I could see shadows of what looked like people. They were gathered in a loose circle, me included. Then a bright ball of light came from somewhere above. What was strange, though, was that the light wasn't illuminating anything. It was just there. Then, the voice spoke again. Now, my pawns, awaken and let the game begin. My eyes opened. Still disoriented from sleep and slightly confused, I found myself in my room, laying in my bed. I reached for my phone, and like before, my hand was met with the book. I rolled my eyes and lifted the book up and towards me. I opened the cover, and on the first page there was today's date, and below it a small line of bold text which read, "The games begin." I almost dropped the book in my surprise and became dizzy. My vision blacked out for a second, and when it came back, I was surprised and a little scared to find myself in a large room that looked like an old temple. Everything was silent, and I didn't dare make a noise. I know it's stupid, but I had seen too many horror movies, and I was scared of something jumping out at me if I spoke. Deciding there was no point in just standing there, I silently crept forward, further into the temple. As I progressed further in, the room grew brighter, as if the sun were shining in through some window from above me. I looked up and was surprised to find no window there at all, or anywhere for that matter. It was as though the light came from nowhere. I continued walking and eventually reached a large, open area. The floor, from what I could tell, was made of small, stone tiles that covered the entire room. As I grew closer to the center of the room, I saw that the tiles changed color at one point, and the different colored tiles formed a large, round space that encircled a smaller, black area. What surprised me about this was that the black area at the center seemed unchanged by the light of the room. It was as though the light wasn't reaching it. I grew closer, until I was standing on one of the tiles that made up the large circle, and stopped. Then I heard a loud, thunderous roar. I squeezed my eyes shut and covered my ears with my hands in a pathetic attempt to block out the terrible noise. Eventually, the noise quieted, and I was able to make out laughter in the noise. I opened my eyes and looked around, and I saw people standing on the other tiles in the blocky circle. There weren't many, just 3. They were cloaked in shadows, much like the people from my dream the night before. They appeared to be looking upwards, so I did the same. My eyes were met with a small ball of light, similar to the one from my dream the night before, that illuminated the room. Took the shape of what looked like a giant man, but slightly different. It had horns coming from what looked like a crown resting on top of its head. The figure's arms were massive and hung down past its waist, where its lower body faded into what resembled a torn curtain, where its legs should have been. Are you the game master?" I asked, with the icy fingers of fear beginning to grip me. The gargantuan creature glanced down at me and began to laugh. Its laughter resounded throughout the entire temple, sending shock waves of terror down my spine. Player 1. Quite an intelligent person. You are very observant. Correct, you are, but how far will that intelligence bring you? I think it's time we found out, the thing said. When it finished its last sentence, the shadowy figures turned to stare at me. Their eyes, or where their eyes should have been, were replaced with glowing, red orbs. The eyes were full of malice and hatred. The other figures continued to stare at me until my vision blacked out again, and I was standing outside of my apartment. I must have been asleep again. It took me a while to regain my composure, as I felt severe nausea when I awoke and almost fell down. Afterwards, I was filled with the urge to go talk with my grandmother about what was happening. Not because I thought she would believe me, but I needed to tell someone. I walked into my apartment and into my room. Surprisingly, my car keys weren't on my nightstand where I had left them. I checked my pockets, wondering if they were there, and when I heard the familiar jingle of the keys, I breathed a sigh of relief. I turned and walked back outside, got into my car, and drove to my grandmother's house. When I reached her house, I felt tenseness in the air, like before. Immediately, my mind rang with the feeling that something was wrong. Had something happened to Grandma? I rushed up to the front door, shoved it open, and raced inside the house. The ringing sensation that something had happened grew to a deafening roar, but the house was still and silent. After a while, I began to hear a soft, dripping sound. I began to move towards the sound, and as I grew closer, the steady dripping sound grew clearer and more pronounced. Worried about the possibilities of what could have happened to my grandmother, I moved more quickly towards the sound and eventually reached her bathroom. What I saw sent chills down my spine. My grandmother was on her knees, face down in a pool of water, which I guessed was formed from the dripping of the shower head. I was about to rush over to her, but I noticed a hand on top of her head. I traced it back up to a figure, dressed completely in black, who held my grandmother's head in the water. Why, I asked the mysterious figure. Aha. Player 1. Pleased to make your acquaintance, the figure said, its voice low and masculine. It must have been a man, but his face was covered in shadows, so I couldn't see what he looked like. But our meeting will be short-lived. The man turned and charged at me, grabbing my neck and slamming me against the wall across the hall from the bathroom. I winced in pain and tried to escape from my attacker, but his grip was firm. I began to find it progressively harder and harder to breathe, and eventually my vision dimmed and I saw a flashback to when I was speaking with the voice in my kitchen. Win the game, and you will obtain that which you desire most. What I desired most. I desired my grandmother's life back. I felt anger begin to grip my oxygen-deprived body, and my strength returned. I lashed out at the man's stomach with my knee, as hard as I could, and he grunted and moved backwards slightly. His grip on my neck loosened, and I was able to breathe again. I repeated my action, but he grabbed my leg and throat again, and slammed me on the ground. At this point, rage had taken over, and I didn't feel the impact of the blow. I glanced around me, looking for something I could use as a weapon, and I saw my grandmother's broomstick laying a few feet away from me. I kicked out my leg at the man, but he caught it, and I pulled down with my leg as hard as I could. He stumbled, and that gave me enough of a time gap to grab the broomstick and swing it at the man's head. The blow knocked him back, and I jumped to my feet, advancing towards him. I swung at him again and kicked him several times, letting felt my anger take over completely. I blacked out, and when I regained my consciousness, the broomstick I held in my hands was bloody and broken. I looked down, and the man was dead. His nose was broken, and his ribs were cracked. Blood was pouring out of his mouth and onto the floor, adding to the pool of blood that was beginning to form. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call the police and tell them about what just happened, but I knew I couldn't. I couldn't tell anyone. They wouldn't believe me. They would call me crazy. The guy called me Player 1. Was he a player in the game too, and was the sacrifice death? What if the other players came after me? Would I have to kill them too? The thoughts were too much for me, and I fell to my knees and grabbed the sides of my head. What was I going to do? My grandma was dead, and she was the only family I had left. The game master said I could obtain what I wanted most by winning the game, but winning meant I had to kill more people. I couldn't do that. I'm not a murderer. If killing one person did this to me, there was no way I could kill another person. Then again, if I didn't obey the game master's rules, he would kill me. I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. Oh. Then I realized something. If I killed everyone and won the game, I could just tell the game master to bring everyone back. With that in mind, I rose to my feet and began to walk back outside. Once I reached my car, I climbed in, turned the car on, and drove back to my apartment. I walked inside and went to my room and saw the small black book sitting on my bed. The cover was open and turned to the second page of the book. I walked over to the book and picked it up, seeing a short sentence written across the middle of the page, which read, "Congratulations on a job well done." What I wondered aloud, rereading the sentence a few more times. You are learning quickly, Player 1. But don't let your aspirations consume you. The game master's voice came from somewhere behind me, but I knew better than to try and look. What do you mean? I asked, but heard no reply. A few minutes passed, and I resolved to just try to get some sleep. I laid down on my bed and shut my eyes, quickly falling into a deep sleep. I only remember having one dream last night. In it, I saw a middle-aged woman standing outside of a flower shop. She looked very forlorn, and mixed with this sad look was an expression of paranoia. She looked warily at everyone who passed her by, flinching away from anyone or anything that grew too close to her. Suddenly, the deep voice of the game master came to me. You have killed Player 3 and seen Player 2. 4 is all you need. Will you make it? He asked. I have seen Player 2. That woman. I heard no reply from the game master, and I don't remember anything else happening in the dream. When I awoke, I tried to remember the face of the woman I had seen in my dream. The sooner I found her and took her out of the game, the sooner I could bring everyone back. I grabbed my keys, then put them back down. Finding someone wasn't going to be easy, and I needed to be thorough. I put on a jacket and walked outside and down the street. In the dream, she was standing outside of a flower shop, and she looked sad. Was she mourning a friend's death, or sad because she knew she could be killed? Nevertheless, I decided to check outside the flower shop where she was in my dream, so I walked down to the only flower shop in town, but she wasn't there. I checked inside, only to find nothing. Maybe I was right about one of her friends dying. I began the trek down to the cemetery located south of town. It was pretty far off, but I didn't have time to get my car, so I started to jog. As I grew closer, the sky grew darker, and rain started to fall, picking up as I reached the gate of the cemetery. I looked in and saw a lone person with a raincoat on and an umbrella over their head. I walked through the gate and up to the person. They must have heard me coming, because they turned around to face me as I approached them. As the person turned, I saw the face of the woman from my dream. She looked even more tired and depressed than she was in the dream. She held a knife in her right hand. player one. I don't want to hurt anyone. I can't. But you can. Can't you? She asked, her voice shaky. I don't. I'm not a murderer, I stammered. She took a step towards me, and I stepped away from her. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want this terrible game to end. Can you do that for me? I've already lost my husband to the game, and I wanted to bring him back, but I couldn't bring myself to kill anyone. The game allows us insights of other players through our dreams. My insight was of you, and the voice told me you were player one. I hoped you would see me too, and we could meet. Now I'm asking you to end this for me. Could you do that? She lost her husband to the game, then the man I killed. I tried to shake off the thoughts. After all, I was going to bring everyone back in the end. She gave me the knife she was holding and told me to end her life. She looked completely calm and ready to die. I made it quick and walked out of the cemetery, my resolve to end things stronger than ever. I began the long walk back home, and by the time I made it back, I was exhausted and more ready than ever to get some sleep. I was almost to my apartment door when I heard a noise that sounded like sobbing. I followed the noise and soon found a young girl walking down the sidewalk with her head down and tears streaming down her face. She looked no older than 9 years old, and she was alone. I sped up my walking ND. When I caught up to her, I kneeled down in front of her and asked her what was wrong. Her response was quiet, and due to her crying, her words were slurred. What did you say? I asked. My mommy and daddy are gone. I don't know where they are, she said, her voice a little clearer. Do you want to come to my house? Then we can try to find your parents. Sound good? Okay, thank you, mister. The girl grabbed my arm and followed me back to my apartment. Once we were inside, she sat down on the couch in my living room and told me she was thirsty. I went into the kitchen to get her something to drink, which was just water. She took the bottle of water and took a sip of it. We sat in silence for a while, and eventually she spoke. I had a really bad dream last night, she said. About what? I was in this black room, and there were people that looked like shadows, but they were standing up. Then, a ball of light was in the sky, and it looked like a man. One of the shadow people started talking, but I didn't hear what he said, and then the man in the light looked at him and laughed. And I don't remember anything else. Shivers ran down my spine. Was this girl a player in the game? If so, then. Hey, mister. Where are you going? The girl said. I ignored her. Mister. I tried to deny it. If the girl was a player in the game, then that would mean I had to take her out of it. I had to win the game, but could I really just take a child's life like that? The other players at least had a reason for it. I killed the man in self-defense, and the woman asked me to kill her. But this girl had done nothing wrong. She had no reason to die. The internal struggle was too much, but I tried to ignore it and keep moving. I tried to remember my motive for all this, and then I remembered something. ... Don't let your aspirations consume you, that was what the game master told me. My aspirations, my motive for doing all that I had done, don't let them consume me. Could that mean that I came this far all for nothing? What if I couldn't bring them back? What if the game master lied? I tried to force the thoughts from my mind. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen drawer and walked back over to the living room where the girl sat, with my mind tearing itself in half as I made my way towards her. I raised the knife, and as I did, I saw fear in the girl's eyes. The sight made me realize how difficult it was for me, when I was young, to trust strangers due to my troubled childhood. I saw myself in the young child sitting before me. At this thought, I loosened my grip on the blade and let it fall to the floor, causing a loud clattering sound to ring throughout the small room as it made contact with the hardwood floor. I couldn't do it. The girl opened her mouth, as if she were about to say something, but I stopped her. Go. At first she looked hesitant, then stood to her feet and ran past me and out of my small apartment without a word. I fell to my knees, exhausted both mentally and physically from all that had happened. I felt completely worn out, and I had disobeyed the game master. What next? Death. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad, a cruel end to a worthless life. Maybe that was okay. Story number 3. Edgar raised his head up from his chest, back pressed firmly into his favorite recliner, his entire body drenched in cold sweat. He stared into shadows at the edge of the living room, eyes welling with tears as he lifted the revolver slowly and deliberately to his temple. 17, he whispered to the darkness. The index finger of his right hand had already found its perch on the trigger during the weapon's ascent, during which he had hesitated no more than a second, his only concern ensuring that the angle he chose would prove fatal. He clenched his left hand into a fist at his side, steeling his will. He inhaled sharply, and with further need of neither breath nor will, he clenched his right hand. Darkness flashed brilliantly to light from the barrel of a .38 special, as the gunshot's dull thunder echoed around the room. The remains of Edgar Freeman slumped sideways in what had once been his favorite chair. The other man with him in that chamber smiled softly, the one in the shadows who had been briefly illuminated by the muzzle flare, that sallow man in the dark suit with the pale blue eyes. He smiled as everything turned gray. Edgar flailed his way to a sitting position, ripping the covers off the bed as he always did when waking up from that goddamn nightmare. After the 4th night in a row with the same dream, he had taken to sleeping with his bedside lamp turned on. After the 6th night in a row, his frenzy upon waking had sent it crashing to the floor bulb, broken and shade cracked by the impact. Tonight had been the 8th night, and as he recited every vulgarity he could recall into the inky darkness of his bedroom, he swore that today he'd find the time to go purchase a box of light bulbs. Involuntarily recalling the stranger in the dream's inappropriately sweet smile, he reminded himself to ask the clerk for their highest wattage. After a warm shower, and a few minutes collecting his thoughts on the side of the bed, Edgar set about his day. Nearly tasteless scrambled eggs and coffee, which would have been merciful if it had been tasteless, comprised his breakfast, and his thoughts turned to how absurdly better Haley's morning meal would have been. Whatever other problems they had, Haley's cooking had been beyond reproach. He would regularly wake to the mouth-watering aroma of a nutritious breakfast which she had prepared for him, usually egg whites on a wheat English muffin with a tall glass of orange juice, at least before the morning sickness had started, and kept her occupied in her prayers to the porcelain, the goddess, for her first waking hour of every day. All this, he reminded himself bitterly, was in the past now. As the vice president of marketing for the 2nd largest athletic apparel company in the country, and as he thought of himself, a reasonably attractive man, Edgar was more than used to the occasional flirting, both casual and aggressive, from young female interns and employees within his department. It came with the territory, and it was never anything he couldn't brush off. Thoughts of either taking it further than flirtations or reporting it to human resources very rarely crossed his mind, the former on account of his pregnant wife, the latter on account of the ego boost it provided. 1 month ago, however, Edgar began an affair with a particularly buxom college intern named Samantha. Above and below the brassiere, she had been nothing special, just a warm body to quell the urges to which Haley had been unwilling or unable to tend after entering her 3rd trimester. Even the sex was unremarkable. Their first rendezvous took place in a motel a few blocks away from the office, the type of place with bay windows overlooking less than scenic freeway overpasses, and even the roaches use black lights before scurrying under the unmade bed. As a cursory nod to legitimacy, the establishment stopped short of offering rates on a per-hour basis, a fact known because Edgar had inquired upon checking in. After that first encounter, the two grew bolder and less discerning in their indiscretions. Edgar's office came next, and that time had been a little more satisfying, a combination of the danger and the skirt Samantha kept on at his request. But boldness turned quickly to carelessness, and Edgar was an apprentice of infidelity less than 2 weeks before Haley discovered his betrayal. Whether it was a whiff of unfamiliar perfume or a phone call from one of Edgar's jealous rejects who had spotted the two of them around the office, his adultery with Samantha was soon the topic to which Edgar returned home from work. The accusation was on her face the minute he walked through the door. He had come home late from a particularly wild romp with Samantha, and the words from Haley's trembling lips quickly disclosed exactly how much she knew. It would have been pointless to lie, she had too many details and he too little imagination, so Edgar confessed, and made a perfunctory effort to justify his behavior. She cursed him with a severity and intensity which Edgar had never seen from her before, and in her final words to him she made it clear that she was leaving, and that she would make sure he would never in his life have a role in raising their child. Despite his heartache at the prospect of losing Haley, Edgar had spent too long in a cutthroat business to take threats passively, even from his wife. He laughed bitterly, and reminded her of the quality of the lawyers within his means. When he was done, Edgar said with words he instantly regretted but found himself powerless to silence, she would be lucky to get weekends and a few holidays with the kid. That was a lie, and he knew it. But at the time his main objective was to get off the defensive and regain the upper hand in the fight, maybe even make Haley reconsider her choice to leave. He would happily cut some hefty checks to a marriage counselor if it saved him from the much larger ones in the form of alimony and child support. But something in the way Haley was smiling at him suggested that he had misunderstood her intentions. And as he realized far too late, if he had been more observant, he might have noticed an empty hook on their key caddy and connected it to that sardonic grin she was wearing. She hadn't left right away, like he had expected. Isn't that always the way it works in the movies and on television? The guy comes out of the bathroom or back from the bar a little while after the fight to find the gal's suitcases dusted off and bulging with all the expensive clothes he bought her over the course of their relationship. Her haughty and defiant, him prostrate and pleading. Edgar would have never played the latter role in his life, but he had fully expected the former from Haley. Instead, an hour after he walked away from their screaming match to take a much-needed shower, he stuck his head into the living room to find her sitting in his favorite chair with a bitch staring off into space and rubbing her goddamn is she ready to pop pregnant stomach. As far as Edgar was concerned, that was the end of the first of presumably many arguments on the subject. He ascended the stairs quietly and slipped into bed. The day had been long enough, and she clearly wasn't going anywhere or she would have left already. Haley never came to bed, but neither did he hear the front door slamming behind her before he drifted off, so it seemed she had decided to stay at least for the night. All will be well, Edgar told himself as sleep overtook him. But I doubt she's going to fix my breakfast for a few days. The noise which ripped him out of that deep slumber came just after 5 o'clock in the morning, according to his alarm clock. By the time consciousness took hold, the sound had died as quickly as it came. He stood reflexively and scanned over the bed with eyes barely awake enough for even that simple task. Eventually determining Haley's side to be empty, Edgar shuffled out the bedroom door and down the stairs to determine what caused the sudden clamor. He didn't need to reach the bottom of the staircase or allow his eyes further time to adjust, to know that she had decided to leave him after all. One glance into the living room cleared up any doubt on that subject. There were no bulging suitcases, or haughty looks, just an unlocked and opened gun cabinet, a crimson splatter on the wall, and a steady trickle of the same beating down the side of his favorite chair and pooling on the hardwood floor beside it. After a moment of shocked paralysis, Edgar lunged for the house phone in huge, desperate strides. The rapidity was not for the sake of Haley, through whose newly ventilated skull he could clearly catch glimpses of the televised presidential debate at the far side of the room, but for her blameless passenger of 7.5 months. He gave all the pertinent information to the infuriatingly indifferent emergency control room operator and waited in the hallway with the front door flung open wide. The gunshot had drawn a crowd of early waking neighbors to the driveway in front of the Freeman residence, a phenomenon bred not out of bravery in the face of danger, but from the casual ignorance of danger reserved exclusively for neighborhoods peopled by the wealthy and sheltered. They eyed him accusingly, none with less than dawning suspicion in their gaze. Edgar raged at them for this, first with harsh thoughts, then with guttural growls and impotent flailing. They would collectively step backward when his fury and frustration flowed strongest, and advance again when the yelling waned in ferocity, a human tide of slack-jawed gawkers. The spectacle was temporarily dissolved by the wailing siren and subsequent appearance of an advanced life support ambulance, from which paramedics rapidly spawned just a few minutes after Edgar's conversation with their dispatcher, another feature exclusive to the type of neighborhood in which Edgar and Haley Freeman resided. The crowd made way for the emergency vehicles, but soon found a new vantage point on Edgar's lawn. The paramedics discovered Edgar's wife slumped over in his recliner and strapped her lifeless form into a gurney. Once she was properly secured, they wheeled her rapidly out of the house and into the back of their ambulance. Edgar jumped in as well, and there was no time to either ask or answer any questions before the crew slammed the bay doors and sped off toward the county hospital. Between checking vital signs and attempts to keep oxygen pumping into the corpse of his wife for the sake of her unborn child, Edgar noted the cautious glances being shot his way by the paramedics, as well as the blue flashes from multiple police vehicles following close behind the ambulance. I didn't have anything to do with it. He wanted to say, to scream, but in the back of his mind he knew that was just a degree or two away from being precisely the truth, and so he remained silent. He had thought they would throw the handcuffs on him as soon as they arrived at the hospital, But instead, the throng of police officers just explained they would wait with Edgar, while the doctors did what they could for the baby and maybe get some information from him if he felt up to talking. Edgar nodded assent, largely because the officers bore all the mannerisms of men who intended to get some information from him whether or not he felt up to talking. They stood outside the operating room, lined up in the viewing area. The officers gave Edgar his space, his face mere inches from the glass, taking occasional breaks to wipe the window off with his sleeve after frantic breaths had fogged it to the point of opacity. They questioned him hesitantly, he answered them hastily, and with little regard for the words he used. His concerns were elsewhere, and he knew there was nothing he could unintentionally blurt out to incriminate himself. He watched as the surgeon made a large incision into Haley's lower abdomen. At least she's sedated for this, Edgar thought insanely, and set about removing the baby from her womb. Within a few minutes, everyone in the viewing area knew everything they needed to know. The officers knew that Haley had apparently died at her own hand. The autopsy would either confirm or deny that she had likely done it as a result of her husband's infidelity, and that Edgar had seen little or no warning signs leading up to the suicide. Edgar, meanwhile, knew that the baby was alive but fading fast, that the baby was a boy. They wanted the gender to be a surprise, one of the few things on which he and Haley never disagreed, and that the baby was being placed in an incubator as a last-ditch effort to save its life. Edgar stood outside the room, the police now keeping an even more respectful distance as he watched his infant son die. There was little commotion about it, and little the doctors could do to prevent it. The child's eyes opened once the entire time, and the next thing Edgar knew, they were pronouncing the time of death as 5:46 a.m. They just cut him out of Haley at 5:29, Edgar thought frantically. My kid, my son, was alive less than half an hour. I didn't even have time to name him. A girl and Haley names him. A boy and I name him. That was the promise we made, since we couldn't even fucking agree on names. Edgar slammed his fist against the wall and distantly felt his knuckles grinding. As he fell to his knees, his hand hurt far less than the scalding hot tears welling behind his eyes. That was 2 weeks ago. Today, Edgar ate nearly tasteless scrambled eggs and drank coffee that would have been merciful if it were tasteless. 8 nights now he lived with the nightmare of killing himself, destroying any semblance of sleep. 8 nights now he lived with the man in the shadows of that nightmare, smiling at his decision to do so. Light bulbs, a huge box of them, highest wattage the hardware store sells, today after work. Edgar again reminded himself of the errand as he threw on his jacket and walked out the door. Work went much the same as always, only with the added distraction and morbid water cooler fodder provided by his wife's suicide. It was annoying, more than anything. Edgar first became consciously aware of a man's form standing just outside the threshold of his office's open doorway when he glanced at the clock to determine exactly how far into the night he had been lost in paperwork. He came to work at dawn and knew it was now certainly dusk, at a minimum. The day had been typical office fare for the return of a bereaved coworker, mindless platitudes and weightless sympathy, empty words from the empty hearts of people paid just enough to pretend to care but not enough to do so convincingly. There was no telling exactly how long the man had been silently standing in the darkness of the hallway, but Edgar recollected the first vague feeling of being watched a few minutes prior. Everyone but the night shift security guard had left hours ago, giving him a welcome respite in which to concentrate and catch up on missed work. Or so he had thought, until this new interruption. Hello, Edgar hesitantly greeted the interloper, fearing the inevitable next in a long line of ham-handed jabs at emotional consolation. Evening, sir, the reply came, grating and phlegmy. His eyes still attempting to adjust to the drastic change from the brightness of his office to the hallway illuminated only by the ambient moonlight leaking in from sporadically placed windows, Edgar judged by the unfamiliar voice that this was either a stranger, a vendor, perhaps, or a colleague with a particularly nasty cold that he'd better not be spreading around. Step inside. I've been burning holes in my retinas under this lamp for the past 2 hours. I can't see a damned thing out there. Really can't stay, the man intoned, practically gargling, just passing through. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's been quitting time for how. Have we met? Edgar's eyes had begun to adjust, and he grew uneasy. The stranger was still dim and blurry, but clearly wearing a dark suit of indeterminable quality. Another minute, and it would be clear if this was some sort of tight-assed internal auditor from the 14th floor, or another detective sniffing around after Haley's death. Whoever it was, the suit betrayed him for a stranger. Fridays around the office were always casual day, when even the senior executives wore polos and khakis. The man was showing no signs of leaving, so Edgar made his eyes next mission determining whether or not he had one of those idiotic access badge lanyards they all had to wear around the building. "I'm new. I'm a messenger. I'm here to deliver a package." Edgar cocked his head, dubious. A courier in a three-piece suit. Pull the other one. No badge either. Edgar did not reply, hoping the process server, Jehovah's Witness stranger, would state their business and move along. "You work such long hours. Don't you miss your family, sir?" A knot materialized in Edgar's throat, and he sat bolt upright in his chair. After the initial shock wore off, Edgar softened his posture, quickly convincing himself of the question's innocuous nature. A labor union representative, of course. He slipped in here to try and play on some suit's delicate sensibilities, blather about unpaid overtime and kids tucking themselves into bed, just trying to get us to abolish our non-unionizing clause with factory workers. I receive fair compensation for the work that I do, as does everyone in our employ. So no, I'm fine, really. Thanks, that should get the point across, he thought with a certain grim satisfaction. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." Well, the stranger turned slightly as if to leave, paused, and leaned his head inside the office for the first time. "They certainly miss you." The words scraped like icicles up the length of Edgar's spine, gripping his skull with tendrils as cold as the grave. The face was gone from view as quickly as it came, the form of the man as well, but the hideous visage remained burned into Edgar's brain, and in the recesses of his mind he was acutely aware that it would be etched there until his dying breath. The eyes were of a milky blue so pale and distant they suggested blindness, but met Edgar's with an unerring gaze that insisted they saw him very well indeed. The rest of the face was unburdened with such signs of vitality. His skin was sallow and sickly, and even at a distance it appeared to be the texture of well-worn leather. The man's cheeks and eye sockets were sunken, the flesh drooping loose in these places, yet drawn tight against the skull around his forehead and mouth. Gaunt and cadaverous, every feature from the greasy, matted hair to the quivering waddle of flesh when he spoke was identical to that of the dark stranger in Edgar's recently acquired nightmares. But everything else was peripheral to the all-encompassing terror which he felt at seeing those damned eyes. There was something unpleasantly familiar in them, something horrible which he found himself powerless to name or explain. Once he regained control of his frozen limbs, Edgar lunged toward the doorway where the man had stood moments prior. The elevator hadn't dinged its arrival, and the stubborn latch on the stairwell door hadn't let out the audible clack customary to every opening and closing. He's still somewhere on this floor, Edgar thought frantically. The idea gave him strength, but no real clarity of purpose. He knew only that he needed to confirm that the stranger's presence here was more than merely a result of his overtaxed mind and guilty conscience. There were no desks, no bathroom stalls, no supply closets left unsearched by the time Edgar's frenzied investigation reached its fever pitch. Motivational posters tacked to the walls of overbearingly congenial and downright suspiciously diverse business people smiling and clasping hands warmly seemed to be mocking him, silent conspirators against Edgar and his quest. Sure, we know who he is and where he went, Edgar could imagine them saying, but we're too busy leveraging our synergy and engaging in value-added interfacing to dialogue on your initiative. He dragged both hands through his hair, gripping thick handfuls of it and tugging slightly. His visitor, if something more than a delusion, had departed unseen and unheard. Edgar could feel his heart pounding wildly, seemingly slamming against the back of his ribcage. He stopped only to grab his briefcase before sprinting down the stairs to escape the increasingly oppressive emptiness of the office. The executive parking deck was windowless, and thus even darker than the building from which he had just departed. It was barren except for him and his Lexus, and likely had been since the security guard made their most recent tour through it hours ago, the guard having shut off all but the emergency lights on the way out. Despite that small assurance, Edgar found himself casting furtive glances over both shoulders and quickening his pace each time they revealed a total lack of reason to do so. He had never been a superstitious man. Any fear of monsters had been laid to rest long ago by the waking horrors which walk amongst men brazenly in the daylight. Student loan debt, insurance premiums, layoffs, mortgage payments, life, Edgar had learned decades ago, sports fangs and claws that make laughingstocks of those belonging to the vampires and werewolves man invented to cope with it. And yet, he scolded himself while fumbling nervously for his keys. All it takes is a little nudge from the imagination to awaken that primordial terror to populate the uninhabited darkness with things which have no right to exist. He was 5 feet from his car, and had just unlocked it with the electronic remote attached to his keys when he heard the scream. It was high-pitched, womanly, terrified, and resonated from the office area directly behind him. Did Haley scream that way right before she pulled the trigger? Edgar thought wildly. He stopped in his tracks, turned sharply, and saw nothing. Then, as if in response to his silent inquiry, the gunshot came. Edgar snatched the cell phone from his pocket, frantically calling 911 for the second time in as many weeks. He flipped the phone open to his ear, but the operator requesting the nature of his emergency sounded 1,000 miles away. The clacking, dragging footsteps coming down the corridor from the sound of the shot and toward the executive parking garage, however, sounded very close indeed. Edgar dropped the phone and practically dove into his car. His foot was on the accelerator as quickly as he could throw the vehicle into gear. The roads outside the office were illuminated solely by street lights and the occasional flash of a passing motorist's headlights. The sun had vanished below the horizon hours ago when people in khakis or sensible skirts departed on a 14-hour break from pretending to care about each other's children or gastrointestinal complications, and left Edgar alone with 2 weeks' worth of backlogged paperwork. Stress, Edgar attempted to convince himself, can make you see things. Stress, he rationalized, can make you hear things. Emotional trauma. None of it took any pressure off of his mind or the gas pedal as he sped toward home. Upon his frantic arrival, Edgar knew something was wrong before he ever burst through the front door. He hadn't turned any lights off since the nightmares started, much less when he expected to be out past sunset, and yet he found himself fumbling around the darkness of his hallway for the lights. When his blind groping finally brushed across the light switch, there was very little surprise in finding the knob broken off following the day's events. It would have been a bigger surprise if the switch had been in working order. Instinct told him to turn and flee the house, but the flashing red number 1 on his answering machine called with an even greater urgency. Despite his hands' anxious trembling, Edgar's fingers struck the play button with unerring precision, a motion he had grown well acquainted with over the past 2 weeks. People he hadn't spoken to or thought about since practically before meeting Haley had seemingly not forgotten him, and had spent the interval between his wife's death and now calling to offer their condolences. Their concern only served to compound his feelings of guilt with each message. What had he done to deserve such loyal friends? He fully anticipated another instance of the same consolation when one of the last voices he would ever have expected emanated from the machine. Edgar, the voice's normally chipper lilt, came, tinged with an unmistakable edge of caution. "It's Samantha. I know I shouldn't be calling you. I'm probably the last person in the world you want to hear from right now, and I can't tell you how sorry I am for what happened." There was a pause, and what sounded like a sob. Edgar thought this was quite possibly the most real, orgasm-less emotion he had heard from Samantha since they first met. "Sorry for everything, really. We couldn't have known how this would end. But I know I have no right to call. I'm just worried about you, is all. I laid out of work today because I heard you were coming back, and thought you didn't deserve to have to bear seeing me on top of everything else. I could only imagine how hard it must be for you right now. And to tell the truth, I was scared to see you. Scared you might point at me every time someone asked, or something. I know it's stupid and selfish, but I came by the office just now to pick up some work to take home with me, and I saw your car in the parking garage." Edgar eyed the time of the message on the answering machine. She had called sometime between the end of his frantic search of the office and before he made it to his car, which means that she was there right about the time that. The voice on the machine had kept talking, and Edgar found himself now listening more intently than ever, his knuckles turning white from clenching the kitchen counter so tightly. Saw your office light was on, but you aren't anywhere around. And man, this place looks like a tornado hit it. Someone really tore through here. I thought about you right away, so that's why I'm calling. I don't know if this is long overdue, or if I should have just done a quick fade and found another job and never called you again, or what. I mean, what's the appropriate thing to do here? I can never make things right, but I'm just so sorry, Edgar. Please call me back when you get this. I miss." Miss was the last word spoken by Samantha, unless one counts a blood-curdling scream, following which came the sound that silenced whatever would have come next. The gunshot rang out like a thunderclap and lost none of its horrible potency on the way through the phone lines to Edgar's answering machine. The ensuing silence was deafening, and Edgar stood rigid in front of the machine, bent forward and staring at it intently, as if he expected it to begin displaying visual clues as to what had taken place. He got audio instead. "Miss you. "Yes, you are very missed." Indeed, the male voice, undeniably the same as earlier that day, gargled as it chuckled into the receiver. The machine beeped, and a solid red 0 informed him that he now has no unheard messages. But to Edgar, the 0 represented far more than that. It seemed almost an answer to not just how many messages he had, but to every question that mattered. What, why, who, how, what's left, what matters, what will tomorrow bring? Nothing but 0, of course. Just a big blood-red negation. Edgar released his death grip from the counter and groped his way into the darkness of the living room. He passed another light switch on the way, noted with no real interest that the switch had been broken off of this one as well, then flopped down into his favorite recliner. "I have had," Edgar whispered into the emptiness of the house that would never again be a home, "a very tough month." The answer to his presumably recipientless statement came in the form of a chuckle from a dark corner of the chamber. Edgar felt every muscle in his body go tense, and he lost all control of his bladder. He could not possibly have cared less about the latter. He merely stared into the darkness and waited for whatever must come next as the warmth spread across the front of his pants. The man in the shadows stepped forward, and Edgar winced away, sinking as deep into the plush chair as he could dig himself. The stranger, simply put, had gone from looking like his flesh was preparing to free itself from its earthly prison to actually having accomplished the task. Edgar was staring at the face and body of a man who had begun to lose some very respectable chunks of himself. Like butter melting in a warm room, some of it actually sloughed off as he made a methodical exit from the darkness. "I know you're wondering why I'm here, and why the past few weeks have seen your life seemingly spiral out of your control. At this point, it comes down to fate. Fate is like playing tug-of-war with an adversary significantly stronger than you. There will always be times when you feel the rope inching your way, your heels dug in, and your earnest exertions yielding the result you've worked so hard for, the victory you know you deserve. But even the times in which you feel the most control, the firmest ground, those are merely your opponent adjusting its grip. But this doesn't preclude what you might call free will. The choices people make are what set fate in motion. And those are the pivotal moments." He paused, then seemingly as an afterthought, "Like you, renting that motel room. Very few things from that moment to this one have been in your control, and none of them of any consequence. Your whore is dead now, and killed by your own gun. Her right eye looks a great deal like your answering machine. Now, just a big red 0. No new messages. By dawn, you'll be in a cell. Your wife found out about you and the whore a few weeks ago. Maybe she took her own life. Maybe she took her own life. Maybe you had a role in that. The whore, though, she was murdered. There's not a jury in the world for whom your guilt is anything but a foregone conclusion." Why, Edgar breathed the inquiry flatly, incapable of inflection. He had never felt so tired, so completely drained and hollow in his entire life. With each word the pale stranger spoke, a deep burning emanated from every muscle in Edgar's body, and yet the frantic scurrying of his mind remained as strong as ever, desperate to place those eyes he felt he knew so well. "Why what? Why did you stray from the wife who once loved you? I couldn't help you there. Not that knowing would change anything for either of us. But that isn't the most important why for you, is it? You want to know why this is happening to you. Why I'm doing this. But for some reason you're afraid to ask me who I am, the true question behind the why, to which I can only say that you must answer for both of us." The stranger resumed his lumbering gait towards Edgar, halting and awkward as he tottered ever closer. Edgar's mind was drawn deep inside of itself to access the half-recalled memory of something he saw years ago in a mid-dawn walk across the parking lot on his way into work. A tattered salt and pepper moth, deceased at the base of a light pole. A coroner's inquest doubtless would have revealed an acute case of banging oneself repeatedly into a dome-like miniature plastic electrical sun. Then came a stiff breeze which sent the moth airborne, flapping and tumbling toward Edgar's path through the parking lot. The breeze settled, and the moth resumed being a body perfectly at rest, as all dead things should, Edgar reckoned, unless acted upon by an outside force. An unseen force, in the case of the moth, and Edgar again reckoned, in the case of the man now standing before him. Because in his movements Edgar saw that moth very clearly. These were the movements of something which once lived, and was now being acted upon by an entirely different unseen force, one which could only approximate the mechanisms of the vessel it now controls. The wind had been the name of that force, driving the moth back into a perversion of life, but to name the force which could do the same for a man. After a moment of silence which seemed to stretch for hours, Edgar met the stranger's pale blue eyes with the last shred of courage he had. Death. Then, a little more confidently, your death. The stranger laughed uproariously, his gaunt frame convulsing with the rhythm of his dry, wheezing cackles. The withered flesh of his face stretched away from blackened gums and all too white teeth in the most hideous approximation of a smile Edgar could have ever imagined. After his laughter subsided, the dark man spoke, wiping away tears which were not there. You misunderstand me. It wasn't my intention to be cryptic. I was merely requesting that you provide me with a name. This body I'm approximating. It's the body I might have had I lived to grow into it. But the eyes, they're the windows to the soul, so they say. And I had hoped you would remember mine. I forgive you, though. You saw me only briefly and under duress. But you were supposed to name me. Dying without a name was the worst part. Comprehension more horrible than the bewilderment had ever been began to spawn in Edgar, as an icy, all-encompassing chill washed over him. The man clapped him gently on the shoulder and leaned in close, placing 4 pounds of cold steel into Edgar's open palm. I told you I was a messenger, and now my task is done. Mom asked me to give you that. She says to hurry. She promises not to be too hard on you if you come home quickly. Edgar quivered helplessly. His eyes had begun to water and burn, searching for any sign of consolation in those of his son. He parted his lips as if to speak, but could not find the words. His silent please response came in presumably the most compassionate tone manageable by his visitor. It's not terrible there, it's just the corpse thing's head cocked to the side, a very boyishly quixotic look in those pale blue eyes. Gray. It's gray there. Time moves much slower, if at all. They show you things. They show me all I would have known in the life which your actions denied me. Venom in that decaying voice now, and Edgar knew that pulling the trigger himself would be the only mercy granted today. The visitor turned, staggering clumsily into the darkness toward the edge of the room, as Edgar sat and examined the loaded revolver. His would-be progeny had almost completely exited from sight, and spoke without any discernible emotion. One more thing. After they cut me out, how long did I last on that incubator? She doesn't know, but I thought you might. I tried my best to hang on, but it couldn't have been long. 15 minutes? 20. Edgar raised his head up from his chest, back pressed firmly into his favorite recliner, his entire body drenched in cold sweat. He stared into shadows at the edge of the living room, eyes welling with tears as he lifted the revolver slowly and deliberately to his temple. 17, he whispered to the darkness. Story number 4. I'd lived my whole life in the small, idyllic farming town of Harvest Hill, where the annual pumpkin festival is more than just an event. It's a cherished tradition that brings the entire community together. Every fall, the townsfolk gather in the town square, surrounded by the glowing red and yellow of autumn leaves, to celebrate the season's bounty and compete for the coveted title of the largest pumpkin. For years, I had dreamed of winning that prize, but this year my hopes were higher than ever. Nestled at the edge of town, my modest farmhouse is surrounded by meticulously tended gardens. Each morning I wake at dawn, don my gardening gloves, and tend to my plants with the care and precision of a master craftsman. This year, my pride and joy was a massive pumpkin that I've nurtured from a tiny seedling into a colossal gourd. It sat in the center of my garden, its vibrant orange skin gleaming in the sunlight, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride every time I looked at it. However, there was one garden in Harvest Hill that always caught my eye with a mix of curiosity and unease: old Farmer Joe's. His property, just next door to mine, was shrouded in mystery. The garden was overgrown and wild, yet his pumpkins always seemed to grow bigger and healthier than anyone else's. Joe was a reclusive, eccentric man who rarely spoke to anyone, and when he did, his words were often cryptic and unsettling. The townspeople often gossiped that he held secrets, old and dark, but of course this was all wild speculation and no one knew anything for sure. As the days grew shorter and the festival drew near, I found myself working tirelessly in my garden, determined to finally outdo Joe and claim the grand prize. The townsfolk noticed my dedication and would often stop by to admire my giant pumpkin, offering words of encouragement and praise. The excitement was tangible, and for the first time I felt that victory was within my grasp. The day of the festival arrived with a crisp chill in the air. We were in the midst of autumn, and the town square was alive with activity, filled with stalls selling homemade pies, caramel apples, and other seasonal treats. Children ran around in costumes, laughing and playing, while adults admired the various pumpkins on display. My pumpkin, transported with great care, sat proudly among the contenders, drawing gasps of admiration from the crowd. As the judges made their rounds, carefully inspecting each entry, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. When they finally approached my pumpkin, their eyes widened in surprise, and I saw them exchange impressed glances. After what felt like an eternity, they announced the winner. My pumpkin had claimed the top prize. The crowd erupted in applause as I stepped forward to accept the trophy. My fellow townsfolk clapped me on the back and congratulated me, their faces beaming with genuine happiness. Amid the celebration, old Farmer Joe approached me. His weathered face broke into a rare smile as he shook my hand, his grip firm and uncomfortably tight. "Congratulations," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "You've done well this year. But remember, there's always a secret to true growth." His strange words lingered in my mind long after the festivities had ended and the crowd had dispersed. As I stood alone in my garden that evening, gazing at the enormous pumpkin that had brought me such joy, a strange sense of unease began to creep in. What did Joe mean by a secret to true growth? And why did his smile seem more like a warning than a congratulation? Little did I know, the answer to those questions would soon turn the essence of my existence upside down, revealing a dark secret that lay hidden beneath the fertile soil of Harvest Hill. My first night after the festival, I experienced fitful sleep and unsettling dreams. I kept waking up to the image of old Farmer Joe's cryptic smile and the ominous tone in his voice. By the first light of morning, all the elation I'd felt in victory had faded, replaced by a gnawing curiosity about old Joe's parting words. I was determined to get to the bottom of it, so I decided to pay Joe a visit. Under the guise of thanking him for his congratulations, I approached his property, feeling apprehensive, yet determined to find out what he meant. His garden, as always, was an overgrown mess of vines and leaves, with enormous pumpkins peeking out from the undergrowth. The sheer size of his produce, even larger than mine, seemed almost unnatural. I found Joe in the back, hunched over a patch of particularly large pumpkins. He straightened up as I approached, wiping his hands on his worn overalls. "Morning, Joe," I called out, trying my best to sound casual. "I just wanted to thank you for your kind words yesterday." Joe looked up, his eyes sharp and piercing despite his age. "You're welcome," he said slowly, as if measuring each word. "Your pumpkin was truly impressive. What brings you here?" Taking a deep breath, I decided to broach the subject directly. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about the secret to true growth. What did you mean by that?" For a moment, Joe said nothing. Then, he motioned for me to follow him. We walked through his garden, the dense foliage brushing against us, until we reached an old, decrepit shed. Joe pushed open the door, revealing a cluttered space filled with gardening tools, jars of strange substances, and dusty old books. "Curiosity can be a dangerous thing," he said, rummaging through a pile of papers. "But since you've come this far, you deserve to know." He handed me an ancient, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "This," he said, "is a grimoire of sorts. It's been passed down through my family for generations. It contains knowledge that most would deem unnatural." I opened the book, my eyes scanning the strange symbols and diagrams that filled its pages. There were detailed instructions on rituals, strange ingredients, and dark incantations. My heart raced as I realized the implication of what I was seeing. "Is this magic?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Joe nodded. "Not the kind you'd read about in fairy tales, but something much older and darker. It's a form of alchemy, using the natural world to bend nature to your will. My pumpkins thrive because of these rituals, but they come at a cost." "What cost?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Joe's expression grew grave. "The soil here is enriched with more than just nutrients. It requires sacrifices, animal blood, bones, and sometimes other things. The magic demands a balance." I stared at him in disbelief, the weight of his words sinking in. "And my pumpkin? How did it grow so large?" Joe sighed. "I saw your dedication and wanted to help, so I enhanced your soil when you weren't looking. I thought it was harmless, a way to give you a taste of success. But I fear I may have set something in motion." My mind reeled with the implications. My prize-winning pumpkin, the source of my pride and joy, was the result of dark, unnatural forces. The sense of accomplishment I had felt now seemed hollow and tainted. As I left Joe's garden, clutching the grimoire tightly, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. The vibrant orange of my pumpkin now seemed sinister, and the whispers of the town took on a more menacing tone. The once idyllic Harvest Hill was now shrouded in a shadow of ancient secrets and dark magic, and I was at the center of it all. The true horror of my situation was beginning to unfold, and I knew that uncovering the full extent of Joe's secrets would come with a price that I might not be willing to pay. The days following old Farmer Joe's revelation were filled with dread but also undeniable fascination. I couldn't bring myself to destroy the grimoire he had given me. Instead, I spent hours poring over its ancient pages, trying to understand the arcane rituals and the nature of the dark forces at work. The more I read, the more I realized how deep and dangerous the magic was. As I delved deeper into the grimoire, I noticed strange changes in my garden. Other plants began to grow at an alarming rate, their leaves larger and more vibrant than ever before. The soil, once rich and loamy, took on a darker hue and a peculiar smell. The once comforting sounds of nature were now accompanied by eerie whispers and rustling noises that seemed to emanate from the very ground. Despite my growing unease, I continued to seek Joe's guidance, hoping to find a way to undo what had been done. Our conversations grew increasingly bizarre. Joe spoke in riddles, his eyes often glazing over as if he were communicating with something unseen. He mentioned ancient spirits of the harvest, entities that demanded offerings in exchange for their gifts. "You've tapped into something old and powerful," Joe said one evening as we stood by the garden fence. "The spirits are pleased, but they are never satisfied for long. They will demand more." "What do you mean by more?" I asked, a sense of dread curling in my stomach. Joe's face darkened. "The rituals require balance. You must give back to the earth what you take. The larger the bounty, the greater the sacrifice." That night, I awoke to strange noises outside my window. Peering into the darkness, I saw shadows moving in the garden, shifting and twisting in unnatural ways. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the center of the garden, the light illuminated a horrifying sight. Small animals, rabbits, birds, and even a stray cat lay dead among the plants, their bodies seemingly drained of life. The vines of the giant pumpkin had grown thicker, their tendrils wrapping around the lifeless creatures as if drawing nourishment from them. The pumpkin, which I'd severed from its roots to take it to the festival, was now reattached to the ground. Panic set in, and I realized that whatever magic had been used was spiraling out of control. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Desperate for a solution, I visited the town library to research the history of Harvest Hill and its connection to old Farmer Joe's family. The librarian, an elderly woman with a wealth of knowledge about the town's past, led me to a dusty archive filled with old newspapers and records. As I sifted through the yellowed pages, I uncovered stories of mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena dating back generations. Each incident seemed to coincide with particularly bountiful harvests at Joe's property. One article detailed the sudden disappearance of a young girl during a pumpkin festival many years ago, hinting at foul play but never proving anything. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that Joe's family had long been rumored to practice dark rituals. The townsfolk, though wary, had always turned a blind eye due to the prosperity the harvest brought. Back at home, I began to experience vivid nightmares. I dreamt of being buried alive, of roots and vines slowly constricting around my body, pulling me deeper into the earth. Each morning I awoke drenched in sweat, the images lingering in my mind. Sarah, my wife, noticed the change in me. "You've been acting strange," she said one morning, her eyes filled with concern. "What's going on?" I couldn't bring myself to tell her the full truth. "Just stress from the festival," I lied, trying to sound convincing. "I'll be fine." But Sarah wasn't the only one who noticed. Neighbors began to comment on the unusual growth in my garden, their curiosity tinged with suspicion. I could see the unease in their eyes, the way they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Determined to find a way to reverse the dark magic, I began documenting everything. I took photos of the garden, recorded the strange noises, and even collected samples of the soil. My collection of evidence grew, but so did my paranoia. I felt like I was being watched, not just by Joe, but by something else, something ancient and malevolent. One night, while reviewing the footage from my garden camera, I saw a shadowy figure lurking near the pumpkin patch. It wasn't Joe. The figure was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing, and moved with a stealthy purpose. My blood ran cold as I realized the figure was performing a ritual, chanting words I couldn't understand. The next morning, I found the pumpkin even larger, its vines more aggressive. In a moment of clarity, I confronted Joe one last time. "I've seen the rituals. I know what you've done," I said, my voice trembling with anger and fear. "Tell me how to stop it." Joe sighed, his shoulders slumping as if carrying the weight of centuries. "You can't stop it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The spirits are already here. The only way to appease them is with a greater sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" I demanded, my mind racing through the possibilities. Joe looked at me with a mix of pity and resignation. "You know what kind," he said. "Blood for growth. Life for life." As his words sank in, I realized the true horror of my situation. The price of my success was far greater than I could have ever imagined, and the darkness I had unleashed was now beyond my control. The situation reached a horrifying turning point on a cold, moonless night. The ghostly quiet of the garden was shattered by an unsettling noise, a low hum that seemed to resonate from the very earth itself. Unable to sleep, I decided to investigate, clutching the grimoire tightly and armed with a flashlight. As I stepped into the garden, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground and into my bones. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the twisted vines of my giant pumpkin, which now seemed almost sentient, writhing and pulsing as if alive. My heart pounded as I moved closer, the sense of impending doom thick in the air. Suddenly I saw an area of disturbed soil near the pumpkin, freshly turned and dark with moisture. Kneeling down, I used my hands to brush away the loose dirt, uncovering something that made my blood run cold. Beneath the soil were the remains of small animals, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways. Among them, a human hand protruded, the flesh pale and lifeless. A wave of nausea swept over me as I realized the full extent of the horror. This was no longer just about a giant pumpkin or an eccentric neighbor. The garden had become a graveyard, and the dark magic I had unknowingly nurtured now demanded human lives as its true price. Desperate for answers, I turned to the grimoire, flipping through the pages with shaking hands. The ancient text described a ritual of appeasement, a way to communicate with the spirits of the harvest. The instructions were clear, but chilling a sacrifice was needed to stop the dark forces, one that matched the scale of the magic used. Fueled by feelings of both fear and purpose, I stormed over to Joe's house, the grimoire clutched in my hand. He met me at the door, his expression one of grim understanding. "I found the bodies, Joe," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and horror. "How do I stop this?" Joe sighed, his face etched with lines of regret and sorrow. "I warned you about the cost," he said softly. "The spirits demand balance. The greater the gift, the greater the sacrifice." "Tell me how to end it," I demanded, desperation creeping into my voice. Joe led me to his cluttered shed once more. From a hidden compartment, he retrieved a small, intricately carved wooden box. Opening it, he revealed a ceremonial dagger and a piece of parchment covered in ancient runes. "This is the ritual of severance," he explained. "It's the only way to break the bond with the spirits, but it requires a life for a life, for a life." My heart sank as I realized the implications. The life of someone I loved would have to be sacrificed to undo the dark magic that had taken hold of my garden. The weight of this knowledge bore down on me like a crushing force. Returning home, I found Sarah waiting for me, her eyes filled with concern. "What's going on?" she asked. "You've been so distant, and the garden. It feels wrong." Torn between the need to protect her and the truth of what I had discovered, I decided to tell her everything. As I recounted the dark history of old Farmer Joe's magic and the horrific revelation in the garden, Sarah's face paled. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "We can't stay here. It's too dangerous." But I knew running wouldn't solve the problem. The spirits were bound to the land, and they wouldn't let us escape so easily. The only way to free ourselves was to complete the ritual. But I couldn't bring myself to suggest the unthinkable. In the days that followed, the garden's transformation accelerated. The giant pumpkin grew even larger, its vines spreading like a cancer across the property, suffocating everything in their path. The eerie hum became a constant presence, a sinister reminder of the dark forces at play. As the situation grew more dire, I spent hours each day in the library, seeking any alternative to the ritual of severance. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the town, I stumbled upon an old, forgotten diary tucked away in the archives. The diary belonged to a woman named Margaret, who who had lived in Harvest Hill over a century ago. Her entries detailed her own encounters with the dark magic and the spirits of the harvest. In her final entry, she wrote of a similar situation, describing the unbearable choice she had to make to protect her family. "My husband's life was the price I paid," Margaret wrote, "but the spirits are never truly satisfied. They always return, hungry for more. The cycle must be broken, or it will continue forever." With a sinking heart, I realized the full horror of what Joe had been trying to tell me. The ritual of severance might only be a temporary solution. The spirit's hunger could not be sated for long, and the dark magic would eventually return, demanding new sacrifices. Standing in my garden that night, surrounded by the monstrous vines and the eerie hum, I felt the weight of an impossible decision. The midpoint of my journey had revealed the true nature of the darkness I faced, and the path ahead was fraught with danger and sacrifice. In the distance, old Farmer Joe's house stood in shadow, a silent witness to the legacy of the dark magic. As I stared at the giant pumpkin, its surface pulsating with a malevolent life, I knew that the hardest part of my ordeal was yet to come. The night of the final confrontation arrived, shrouded in an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The air was heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and the pervasive hum of the restless spirits. The giant pumpkin, now a monstrous, grotesque behemoth, dominated the garden, its vines twisting and writhing with a life of their own. Desperate to end the nightmare, I gathered the necessary items for the ritual of severance: the ceremonial dagger, the ancient parchment, and a vial of my own blood. Each item felt like a lead weight in my hands, the significance of what I was about to do pressing down on me. Sarah stood by my side, her face pale but resolute. She had insisted on being there, despite my attempts to protect her from the full horror of the situation. Her presence gave me strength, but also deepened my fear of what might come. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. Together, we walked to the heart of the garden, where the monstrous pumpkin loomed. I knelt before the pumpkin, spreading the parchment on the ground and placing the dagger and vial beside it. With a deep breath, I began to chant the incantation from the grimoire, my voice shaking but gaining strength as I went on. The words felt foreign and ancient, resonating with a power that made the air around us vibrate. The vines reacted almost immediately, writhing more violently, as if sensing the impending threat. The hum grew louder, filling my ears and making it difficult to concentrate. I took the vial of blood and poured it onto the parchment, watching as the dark liquid seeped into the ancient runes, making them glow with an eerie light. As I continued the chant, I felt a presence growing stronger, an unseen force that seemed to watch and judge my every move. The final part of the ritual required the sacrifice of a life, one that had been touched by the dark magic. I had hoped that the animal sacrifices Joe had made would be enough, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Tears streamed down my face as I raised the ceremonial dagger. I turned to Sarah, her eyes wide with fear and understanding. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. Before I could act, a powerful force knocked me to the ground, the dagger flying from my hand. The vines surged forward, wrapping around Sarah and lifting her into the air. She screamed, struggling against the crushing grip of the tendrils. "No," I shouted, scrambling to my feet and grabbing the dagger. I slashed at the vines, but more took their place, pulling Sarah towards the monstrous pumpkin. Desperation fueled my actions as I hacked and cut, my hands slick with blood from the thorny tendrils. Suddenly, old Farmer Joe appeared, his face a mask of determination and sorrow. "This is my doing," he said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. "I have to set it right." With a swift motion, he took the dagger from my hand and plunged it into his own chest. The vines recoiled, releasing Sarah and retracting towards the pumpkin. Joe fell to the ground, blood pooling around him as he chanted the final words of the ritual. The air crackled with energy as the ground trembled beneath our feet. The giant pumpkin began to wither, its vibrant orange fading to a sickly brown. The vines shriveled and turned to dust, releasing a cloud of dark, acrid smoke. The hum intensified, reaching a deafening crescendo before abruptly stopping. Joe's body lay still, his sacrifice complete. The garden fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as the dark magic dissipated. The spirits, momentarily appeased by Joe's selfless act, retreated into the earth, their hunger sated for now. Sarah and I stood in stunned silence, the horror of what had just happened slowly sinking in. The garden, once a source of pride and joy, was now a barren wasteland, the remnants of the dark magic leaving an indelible mark. We buried Joe next to his monstrous pumpkin, marking his grave with a simple stone. His sacrifice had saved us, but the cost had been immeasurable. As we left the garden, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits were still watching, waiting for their next opportunity. The climax of our ordeal had revealed the true price of tampering with forces beyond our understanding. The darkness that had taken root in Harvest Hill was not so easily vanquished, and the memory of that fateful night would haunt us forever. The ultimate confrontation had ended, but the scars it left behind would remain, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked beneath the surface of our once idyllic town. The days following the climactic confrontation were a blur of exhaustion and grief. The garden, once the pride of my efforts, was now a desolate patch of scorched earth and withered plants. The giant pumpkin had collapsed into a decaying heap, its vibrant orange hue now a sickly brown. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over our home seemed to dissipate, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Sarah and I struggled to come to terms with the events that had transpired. We moved through our daily routines in a daze, haunted by the memories of that fateful night. Old Farmer Joe's sacrifice had saved us, but the price had been high, and the weight of guilt and sorrow was overwhelming. News of the bizarre occurrences spread quickly through Harvest Hill. The townspeople, initially skeptical, became increasingly curious and wary. They whispered about the giant pumpkin, the strange lights, and the eerie hum that had emanated from our property. Joe's sudden death added to the sense of mystery and fear that gripped the town. One afternoon, the town council paid us a visit. They stood in our barren garden, their faces a mixture of disbelief and concern. "What happened here?" asked Mayor Thompson, his voice filled with apprehension. I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "There was an incident," I said slowly. "Old Farmer Joe tried to help us, but things got out of control. He sacrificed himself to stop it." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. "We've heard rumors about Joe and his family," said Mrs. Henderson, the town librarian. "Dark rumors. Is there any truth to them?" I nodded reluctantly. Joe had a knowledge of ancient rituals, a kind of dark magic. It's what caused the giant pumpkin to grow so large, but it came with a price. The council members fell silent, absorbing the gravity of my words. "We need to ensure this never happens again," said Mayor Thompson finally. "The town must be protected." Sarah and I knew we couldn't stay in Harvest Hill. The memories were too painful, the whispers too loud. We decided to sell our property and move to a neighboring town, hoping to find a fresh start away from the darkness that had consumed our lives. As we packed our belongings, I couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. The grimoire, now hidden away in a locked chest, seemed to call to me, its pages filled with secrets I could never unlearn. I debated whether to destroy it, but something held me back, the fear that the knowledge within might be needed again. On our last day in Harvest Hill, Sarah and I visited Joe's grave. We placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the simple stone marker, a silent thank you for his sacrifice. The air was still, the oppressive presence of the spirits gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were not entirely vanquished. Harvest Hill took measures to prevent a recurrence of the dark magic. The town council declared Joe's property off limits, eventually bulldozing the decrepit shed and covering the garden with fresh soil. They held a town meeting to discuss the strange events, urging residents to remain vigilant and to report any unusual occurrences. The town slowly returned to normal, but the memory of the giant pumpkin and the dark rituals lingered. Stories and legends grew around the events, becoming a cautionary tale passed down through generations. Harvest Hill would never forget the price of tampering with forces beyond their understanding. In our new town, Sarah and I worked hard to rebuild our lives. The shadow of Harvest Hill loomed over us, but we found solace in each other's company and the fresh start we had created. We planted a small garden, careful to use only natural methods, and watched as it flourished without the taint of dark magic. But the past was never far behind. I kept the grimoire hidden, a reminder of the danger that knowledge could bring. Late at night, when the world was quiet, I would sometimes hear the faint hum of the spirits in my dreams, a chilling reminder of the darkness that still lurked beneath the surface. Our new life was a testament to resilience and the power of love, but it was also a constant struggle to keep the shadows at bay. The events in Harvest Hill had changed us forever, leaving scars that would never fully heal. In the end, we learned to live with the memory, finding strength in our shared experiences in the hope that we could prevent such horrors from ever happening again. This part of our story was a quiet one, marked by the slow but steady process of healing and the enduring reminder of the price we had paid for our brush with darkness. Years passed, and Sarah and I slowly built a peaceful life in our new town. The horrors of Harvest Hill faded into distant memories, although the scars always remained. We had a child, a bright and curious boy named Tommy, who brought joy and light into our lives. Our small garden flourished naturally, free from any dark influences. One crisp autumn evening, as we were putting Tommy to bed, he handed me a small, carved wooden box he had found while playing in the attic. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. It was the same intricate design as the box Joe had used to store the ceremonial dagger. "Daddy, look what I found," Tommy said, his eyes wide with excitement. "It's full of old papers and stuff." With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside were several yellowed pieces of parchment, covered in familiar runes, and a small vial of dark, dried liquid. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what it was: the remnants of the grimoire and the tools for dark rituals. Late that night, after Sarah and Tommy were asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the contents of the box spread before me. My mind raced as I tried to understand how these items had followed us. Had the spirits somehow transferred their connection to our new home? Or had the dark magic never truly left me? As I studied the parchments, a familiar hum began to fill the air, soft at first, then growing louder. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the horrifying truth: the spirits had found us, and they were growing restless once again. Suddenly, a shadow flickered across the kitchen, and the air grew icy cold. I turned, expecting to see some ghastly apparition, but instead there was nothing. The hum, however, persisted, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just out of sight. Unable to ignore the growing sense of dread, I knew I had to act quickly. I retrieved the hidden grimoire and compared it to the new parchments, hoping to find a way to protect my family. As I read, it became clear that the spirits were not simply satisfied with the occasional sacrifice. They sought to bind themselves permanently to a powerful source of life, such as a child. Panic surged through me as I realized their target was Tommy. Desperate to shield him from the impending danger, I decided to confront the spirits directly. I returned to the garden, now bathed in the eerie glow of the full moon, clutching the grimoire and the ceremonial items. Standing in the center of the garden, I began to chant the incantations from the grimoire, calling forth the spirits. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and the air grew thick with a palpable energy. The vines around the garden began to stir, twisting and curling as if awakened by my words. A shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form shifting and indistinct. It was the same figure I had seen in the garden all those years ago, the entity that had fed on the sacrifices. It spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth. "You have summoned us," it intoned, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "What do you seek?" "Release my family," I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "You've taken enough. Let us live in peace." The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "The bond is not so easily broken," it said. "A life for a life, remember. But there are other ways to appease us." Desperate, I offered myself in place of my son. "Take me," I pleaded. "Just leave my family alone." The spirit considered my offer, its eyes narrowing. "A noble sacrifice," it mused. "But we require something more. Your life alone is not enough. You must bind your bloodline to us, ensuring that our connection endures." The full weight of the spirit's demand crashed down on me. Binding my bloodline meant condemning future generations to the same darkness I had tried so hard to escape. But there was no other way to protect Tommy and ensure his immediate safety. With a heavy heart, I agreed. "I will bind my bloodline to you," I said, my voice breaking. "But spare my son and allow us to live in peace for as long as we can." The spirit's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "So be it," it said, extending a shadowy hand. "Seal the pact." With trembling hands, I used the ceremonial dagger to cut my palm, letting the blood drip onto the ancient parchment. The runes glowed bright red, and the hum intensified, resonating through the garden and into the night. As the ritual concluded, the shadowy figure dissipated, and the garden fell silent once more. The oppressive presence lifted, leaving me drained but relieved. I returned to the house, where Sarah and Tommy slept soundly, unaware of the pact that had been made. The next morning I buried the grimoire and the ceremonial items deep in the forest, far from our home. The garden slowly returned to its natural state, free from the monstrous growths and eerie hum. Life continued, seemingly peaceful, but I could never forget the price we had paid. Years later, as I watched Tommy grow into a bright and inquisitive young man, I couldn't help but feel a pang of dread. The spirit's hunger had been sated for now, but the pact I had made would hang over our family like a dark cloud, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface. In the quiet moments when the wind rustled through the trees or the moon cast long shadows across the yard, I could still hear the faint, sinister hum, a reminder that the spirits were always watching, waiting for the next chapter of our bloodline to unfold. Story number 5. It was finally time. Ever since the cave was discovered in the mountain next to my hometown, I had always wanted to explore it. It was my right after all. I was the one who found it in the woods as a child, but everyone always told me I was too young to try. So I did the obvious thing and waited it out. I waited 12 years, watching the cave become a point of attraction for scientists and explorers, dreaming about being one of them someday. Literally. Barely any nights passed without me descending into those depths in my dreams, camping in the darkness and discovering new tunnels, and sometimes even stumbling upon unknown cave monsters and trying to run away from them, failing and yelling out in agonizing futility as I got ripped to shreds. That did not deter me, however. On the contrary, every single dream I had inflated my thirst for it. I swear I could actually hear it calling out to me, a call to descend, begging me to see it in all its glory and mystery. And now, after my 12th year of waiting, I stood in front of the cave mouth. I had prepared everything I could, my skills polished to their utmost extent through exploring smaller, safer, more well-explored caves, and my equipment having been checked and tested tenfold. The cave was one of the more mysterious ones in the world, its true depth yet to be known despite the vast number of explorers having tried. It was almost as if it had been saving its biggest mysteries for me, as if it knew it belonged to me. I could still hear its call, now louder than ever, emanating from the abyss that was the cave mouth, and although I did have my own internal thoughts reminding me of the dangers, I chose to descend. This being my first time exploring a cave of this scale, I was accompanied by a relatively and disappointingly large team of 3 fellow rookie cavers led by 2 veterans. We walked into the entrance to the first of many shafts we would have to climb down. The leaders had tied a rope to a tree a short distance from the mouth and lowered it into its shaft. One of them went down and the remaining one helped lower us down one by one. It took me 5 minutes to scale it down. They then followed us and we set forth into a tunnel, which led us to a narrow gap in the wall we were told we had to crawl through on all fours. The crawl was 15 meters long, but we felt surprisingly safe thanks to our chaperones. When I crawled out the other end of the passage into a 6x6 room and turned back, I realized that the light of day that followed us had now completely disappeared, and our torches were the only thing letting us see. Though that was a matter of course. The surface was out of reach now of our hands and our eyes, and if we were to turn our lights off, our eyes would never adjust to the dark. Another reminder that I was right to bring backup lights and a whole lot of glow sticks with me. We turned back and went down a path right underneath the one we had come through, one we would have totally missed if not for our guides. I braced myself for the unknown. For a few hours or so, our guides led us through some more shafts and tunnels, both narrow and wide, of the maze, describing the hallmarks we went through and telling of their own experiences and discoveries in it. I almost felt cheated hearing them speak of how they had violated the sacred wonderland I was supposed to explore, but I knew better than to tell them about it. They also explained how caving is actually not as scary as most would believe, and you're only really in trouble if you get injured or lack supplies, equipment, or company. That made sense considering how easy it had seemed, but it too carried with it a feeling of dissatisfaction, a feeling that I had been cheating. We had to descend for 5 hours before we reached the first supply camp, a large limestone chamber 1,500 feet underground and 22 meters wide. We rested there, cooked and ate our canned food, and slept. I wondered if I would still have dreams of the cave, since I was now inside it. I was not disappointed. Or in my dream, I was in that same cave, but had no one with me and had to descend it on my own. I crawled through a passage that got narrower the further I got, until the walls felt like the coils of a boa constrictor, crushing the life out of me. I was woken up just then, and we headed for the next camp. The trip was much the same, except there were more narrow passages that we had to crawl through on our torsos. We reached the second camp by descending a 60-foot column, into a much bigger chamber, more than 3,000 feet underground. Our guides told us this one split into various paths and chambers to scout, and we would be choosing one of those to explore the next day. Around this time we had heard the sound of water flowing that was much louder than what we had been hearing up till now. The leader told us that it was probably some rainwater that ended up flowing into the cave. Seeing the worried looks on our faces, he added that it was nothing to worry about. The water would most likely take one of the passages to flow into, and it would have to fill up almost the entire cave before reaching us. So even if something were to happen, we would have plenty of time to escape. We did the same as the first camp. We rested, ate and slept, and I was in the middle of yet another cave dream when I was woken up by the thunderous sound of crashing water. Upon asking, the leader regrettably told us that the worst-case scenario had happened. The water was rising way faster than expected and we needed to leave. They made preparations to climb the shaft while we gathered only the most important items so as to not slow us down. I felt heartbroken. I do not want to leave. This is what my whole life has led up to. Such thoughts clouded my mind as I tried to figure out what to take and what to leave behind. We still had thousands of feet to climb, so obviously I needed the food. The lights were definitely important too, so was my climbing gear. As I was figuring things out, the guide told me the others had started ascending the shaft again, so I threw my backpack on, catching a glimpse of concern on his face, and tied the harness around myself. I started to climb, but upon reaching the shaft saw how much the water had increased and was crashing down the same column I would have to climb. We could not climb through that water pressure, and I signaled as such to the guide. We regrettably lowered ourselves back down and hurried as we tried to find someplace we could take shelter from the water. We chose one of the passages that sloped upward and crawled its narrow tunnel up until it sloped downward again. We came into a small room, this one more like 5 by 5 feet. We sat down and caught our breath and tried to analyze the situation. The two of us were the only ones left behind. We hoped that the rest of the team managed to make it to safety, but that did not ease our feeling of being trapped. The guide told me that we did not have to worry. We could try to follow this passage and reach the third camp. Maybe it had survived too. Listening to that made me feel relieved, and upon realizing that, I wondered, was I relieved that we would get out of the cave, or was I relieved that we could continue to descend? Did I take so much time packing up not out of confusion, but hoping for this exact thing to happen? The more I thought about it, the more it disturbed me. This was the first time I felt fear of my own greed, but it would not be the last. Regardless, I chose to continue my descent. It took us another few hours to get to the next camp, and we reached there after squeezing through a tiny claustrophobic tunnel 9 inches wide that stretched out for 30 meters. It was a grueling process, all the more so with just the two of us, but we pushed through. Upon making it to the camp, we felt overwhelmingly relieved and helped ourselves to the supplies available. After some much-needed rest and relaxation, the guide pulled out his map and started to review the next plan. He told me that there was actually a passage that led directly upwards, and that is what we would be using to get back to the surface. I was not paying much attention, however. My mind was overcome by the dread again. Dread of the demon I had come to know as my greed. I saw that, right below the passage the guide said would lead us upwards, there was another passage going downwards. As soon as I saw that, my mind let go of everything else. Every other sound, feeling, everything in my visual view was pushed out of my observation. All I could think was, I want to go there. The guide had to shake me to bring me back to my senses. He was concerned for me and told me to sleep for now. We would start our ascent the next day. The both of us lay down to sleep together on the wet rocks. I was awoken a few hours into my sleep. I lay on my side, seeing the cave we were supposed to take visible in the faint light right in front of me, its entrance slightly illuminated, as if showing us the hope inside its mouth and up its liberating climb. Below that, however, was something different. Below that was a Stygian abyss that not only gazed into me as I into it, but also called out to me. The call started out as a seducing whisper, slowly growing into a pleading moan, and eventually going even further into a chilling cry that beseeched, commanded, threatened me to enter it. It was deafening. I could not move. I could not do anything. I understood this was just another nightmare, though that did not make it any easier. The call seemed more than an audition of my own greed. It was really there, an infernal siren of the depths making itself known to no one but me. It was so much more terrifying than being chased by cave monsters or crushed by sentient rocks. I was paralyzed, and I felt so frightened and helpless. I I was woken up by the guide around that part. He seemed concerned for me, but I told him I was okay. He told me it was finally time to go and we had to gather our equipment and supplies. I stocked up on food and water. I was free to take my time this time. He told me that there was a column that we had to scale up, and this time he would go first to see if it was safe, and I would have to wait. I waited for a while, trying my best to avoid so much as looking at the passage below. However, I could not ignore the voices calling out to me. It felt agonizing to resist it. It was also infuriating. I thought I could make it end so much sooner if I just confronted the call and screamed at those demons to stop bothering me once and for all. And so I turned around and snapped my gaze to the entrance with determination to assert dominance over the voices. Unlike anything I could have expected, though, the voices stopped before I could even say anything. They were now replaced by utter silence, broken only by the dripping cave water and the distant sounds of the guide trying to climb high above. I felt tricked. This was what I wanted. The voices had ceased. The entrance to the passage that up till now felt like an impossible, maddening void was just another cave entrance, its mouth illuminated by my light. I now felt none of the pressures I felt forcing me to descend. That, however, was not comforting in the least. The pressure had been replaced with angst. I was free to go up the passage, reunite with the team, and come back sometime later to explore the same passage again, and nothing would be different. I now had my free will back. I could choose. And that was the reason behind the angst. The fact that I now had nothing pushing me to descend, it was just my own desire, my demon of greed. I wanted to go down there, despite it being common sense that me and the guide needed each other to get to the surface. Despite the fact that caving alone meant almost certain death, I wanted to leave him behind. I remembered how unsatisfied I felt traveling with my companions. It all came back to me, how much I felt the cave belonged to me, how I felt it my right to explore its still virgin passages, and that brought me to terms with my desire. Thus I stepped down into the lower entrance. I chose to descend. It started off with a rocky path that sloped downwards, and I rushed down it. I could hear the guide calling out to me in the distance, and I had to get away from him or he would come to take me back. I hoped he would not follow me and could manage to somehow reach the surface without me. I had no intention of going with him. I had memorized a bit of the map and knew that this passage split into several down the line. I just had to get there fast. I hurried as much as I could, ducking down under the stalactites, and reached the fork in the cave. I chose one at random and hurried down it. And just like that, I was out of the guide's reach. I slowed down and took my time, basically strolling ahead and checking out the path in front of me with my light. There was much less of a chance the guide would catch up to me now, and he was not stupid enough to risk going into the wrong path on his own. At least I hoped he was not. If he decided to come after me out of a sense of responsibility, well, I wished him luck, but I would not want to go back to him. I still hoped he would find safety, but he did not concern me anymore. I was now free to enjoy my time here. I had a fair amount of equipment and supplies. I was able to find my own way through the tunnels and shafts through grit alone. Yes, I was blaspheming by going alone into unknown territory, but I just did not think about it. I simply chose to descend. A few hours in, I felt hungry and took a lunch break. I had a lot of food bars and unwrapped one of them to savor in the light of my glow stick. I took a moment to take in the environment. I was sitting in a slightly sloping tunnel about 2 meters wide, a tunnel that sounded wet. The only sound I could hear was the dripping of water echoing through the moist caverns. I felt the humidity too, on my skin and in my nose as I breathed in the musty, earthy smell. There was no turning back for me now. I would be spending the rest of my life in these wet paths. The dripping water was all I would ever hear. At least that is what I thought, until another sound caught me off guard. I heard the sound of rock sliding over rock. I was confused. What could have made that sound? Was there someone else there? I thought the guide actually managed to catch up to me. But that was impossible. I was following my own path blindly. How could he have caught up to me just like that? The sound continued. I called out to him. And the sound stopped. My glow stick went out around the same time. What I heard next was something akin to shuffling. Not the shuffling of human feet, no, for there was no recognizable rhythm of bipedal motion. But it definitely was the sound of something moving, maybe more like a large sack of gravel, dragging along the ground. This was the first time I was made to feel external fear. All of a sudden, the water was not the only thing I could hear anymore. Besides that noise, I could also hear my own heart thumping in my chest, fueled by an apprehensive rush of adrenaline. I was breathing heavily, shivering in the total darkness. There was something else with me here, something alive, but not human. And that something was aware of my presence. I flashed back to my nightmares. I did not know what to do. The sound stopped. But that was replaced by a feeling that I was now being watched. I felt the presence of the thing that was making the sound. It was now right at the end of the tunnel, only a few feet away, and could very well see me. And then it just stayed that way. For a few minutes. For an hour. For several hours, all the while I was paralyzed with restless agitation. And then I heard the sound of it moving again. It was gone. Just like that. I jolted as if snapped out of a trance, panting heavily, and started crying. I had just come into contact with something I had no knowledge of, something I could not even see. For the first time I had faced the fear of the unknown. And it was that fear that brought me back to my senses. What the hell was I doing? I did not want to explore anymore. I wanted to go home and forget this cave even existed. I turned on my light and looked back up to the way I came, and I remembered I was only blindly following along and had no idea how to get back. Besides, that was the way the creature had come anyway. I looked the other way, down the way I was heading. I heard the siren's call to descent again. I whimpered and tears welled up in my eyes once more. That was the only choice I had. There was no turning back. Hesitant, I once again obeyed those whispers. Once again I chose to descend. I would not come across that kind of creature again as I traveled the caves for days, following the siren's whispers. I slept when I wanted to sleep, ate when I wanted to eat, and went when I wanted to go. But I could not stop descending. When one of my lights ran out, I switched to another one. All I could do was keep moving, and eventually the food inevitably ran out. When it did, I thought my time had finally come. I now had no choice but to starve to death. That is, until I came across an underground lake. And in it, I found a creature. It was no alien monster, but a simple cave bug, and before I could think, I grabbed it and shoved it into my mouth. And thus my demise was prolonged, and my diet shifted to the critters and lizards I found in the cave. Eventually my water ran out too, and I started drinking from any source of water I found in the cave. I knew it was not safe or pleasant to consume, and neither were the critters. But I was not in control of my body now. It was moving on its own, and would rather die painfully of disease and exhaustion than stop or starve. I somehow managed to avoid any major injuries, and the voices compelled me to ignore any minor cuts and scrapes. My body kept delaying my fate with every smallest chance of survival, and I could only keep moving as I waited in agony for the release of death. I would keep moving for some more days, maybe weeks, or even months, until I wondered if I was closer to the Earth's core than to the surface. It was definitely getting warmer. After some time, as I squeezed through the nth tunnel, I dropped onto a muddy floor, which caught me off guard, as it had been a while since I had seen anything other than boulder slopes. I stood up and examined the area, which seemed like a warm and slightly misty cavern around 10 meters in diameter, its floor muddied by water dripping from the stalactites. I walked around and tripped forward almost instantly as my foot caught onto something. I tried to see what it was that had tripped me and stumbled back again as I realized it to be a human-sized skeleton. I got up again and approached it nervously and picked it up to observe it. It was definitely the size of a human, but not human at all. The skull, for one, seemed more like that of a reptile, and the bones, although thicker and stronger than human bones, seemed hollow. It had 8 limbs, 4 of which seemed like arms, 2 like legs, and 2 that fit the function of both. Each limb ended in 4 finger-like appendages. The ribcage-esque part was a lot wider and denser and expanded to cover almost the entire torso and brought to mind a turtle shell. The best way to describe it would be a combination of an insect and a tortoise skeleton. This was clearly a creature unlike anything humans knew. I looked around. There were at least 4 more such fossils, mostly buried in the mud. Once again, I was reminded of my cave nightmares. I remembered the creature I had met in the dark back then, the one that for some reason chose to spare me. I had not been able to see it then, but I remember the sounds it made, which looking back could have been akin to what some giant, muscular vermiform organism would be like. These things were clearly different. I trudged through the mud in a hurry, wanting not to spend a second more in that damned chamber. I just could not wrap my mind around the fact that I had come across not one, but two species that had been living unbeknownst to us so far below the surface. I did not want to think about it, but I could not just stop thinking either. How long had these things been around for? Were they simply animals, or were they intelligent like us? What would happen if I were to come across one of them? What would they do to me? Were there other such abominations here? Were my dreams more than just dreams? I shivered as I walked around. The thoughts were too excruciating for me. After walking for a while, I found the way out, which was a steep and muddy slope downwards. Without a moment's hesitation, I jumped in and slid down it. This time I landed on a rocky surface that was only slightly muddy. In front of me, however, was total darkness. I was confused. I checked my torch. It was on. But shining it in front of me revealed nothing beside a pitch-black darkness. I looked around and down, and realized I was on a sort of escarpment, a cliff edge next to the wall. The edge went along the wall and sloped down. Though that was all I could see. I did not know how deep it went, or how vast this giant cavern in front of me was. My torch light dispersed after only a few feet in front of me. It had nothing to reflect off, nothing to illuminate ahead. The cosmic terror enveloped me again. Up till now, when I stared into the darkness of the caves, I could feel it staring back into me, as if it was enjoying how much it intimated me. This was nothing like that. The abyssal void I faced now felt like it did not so much as notice my presence. It did not care how I felt. It did not care if I was even here. Yet it was right in front of me, seeming to expand its cold, uncaring tendrils of horrifying nothingness into and beyond me, stretching fathomlessly deep below, cosmically vast around and endlessly unending within. No description would ever be enough to capture it. It was like meeting God and peering right into his sheer, true, innate and raw cosmic indifference, like dissolving yourself in the soup of total infinity itself. It was truly and utterly maddening. After shuddering in maddened despair for hours on end, I heard the siren again, and again I answered it by forcing my rubbery legs to follow the path along the cave wall. Walking down around the darkness, I could not help but try to encapsulate its vastness by my reason. It was an underground cavity, clearly, but the sheer size was far beyond anything thought possible. The entire cavern should have collapsed under the pressure of the rocks above it. I wondered if it was the cause of deliberate intervention. Even if it was, though, I could not so much as guess what any comprehensible purpose of it was in the first place. One possibility, that I hope to God was not true, was that it was as a nest for some other sort of beast of incredible yet terrible proportions. After walking for hours on end until the call to descent itself faded out, I found another exit on the side of the same path. I made no second thought choosing that foot-wide tunnel over the aggravating spiral that ran uninterrupted down for who knows how long. I half crawled, half slid my way down it and ended up in another chamber, this one having nothing suspicious but had the entrance to a shaft. Thinking it was still better than the void I had come from, I scaled it down and followed the passage it led to. It was on that path that my exhaustion caught up to me. I put my equipment down, turned my light off, and curled up to sleep while still holding it. For a while now, the cave dreams had stopped haunting me, but they were replaced with something more torturous. Like many times before since I had been lost underground, I remembered the time before I had set foot in these damned places. I remembered the companions I came with and had abandoned for my own insolent greed. I regretted everything up to that point. I cursed myself for wasting my life chasing these rock mazes. This cave did not belong to me. I belonged to it. I should have lived my life like everyone else and not some cave-worshipping fool. Even if I had come here, I should have stayed with my crew and followed my instructors. I prayed, more sincerely than I ever had in my life, for a chance to go back, to trade every choice I had made that brought me here for a simple chance to be back on the surface. I cried myself to sleep, wishing I would wake up at home. Having spent so long down here, I had gotten used to waking up in total darkness. That is why I slept with a torch in my hand. I would wake up, rub my eyes, and turn it on before getting ready to move on again. Which is precisely why I was too confused and still considered myself to be dreaming when I woke up and found I could just barely see the rock wall in front of me. I looked at my torch. It was off. I turned it on, examined the passage, and off again. It got dark, but my eyes adjusted after a while and I could see again. There was light here. I punched the wall to see if I was not dreaming. After my painful yet overjoyed confirmation, I grabbed my things and set forth, hoping to find the source of the literal light at the end of the tunnel. I was almost jogging. The hope had brought forth a hidden feeling of excitement I had forgotten long ago. The tunnel went on for some few dozen meters and the air was now starting to get more humid. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest as I took the last turn and faced the exit that had a few rays of light shooting through its mouth. I stepped forth and cried out in awe at the sight in front of me. It was a city. An underground metropolis, or the ruins of one at least. I had come out into the bottom of a massive valley of some sort, one that seemed to almost stretch out and up forever, but one that did end, appearing like a crack in the ceiling, one lit up with daylight. It was actually really deep, however, around 6 kilometers by my estimate. That is how far below I had wandered. Still, the exit was right there. The walls of the trench had buildings, structures and bridges either carved or built into it, and they seemed to extend along the walls right up to the surface. In the near distance, on the bottom surface, there was a dense network of bridges leading to and from a condensed cluster of tall spires and prism-shaped buildings, with a pyramidal structure in the dead center of the cluster that towered above the others and resembled a Sumerian ziggurat. I could tell it was abandoned as the structures were all covered in vines and moss, surprising to find any at this depth, and there were no sounds to signal any active population. There were distant sounds of birds and other wildlife, though, which were, again, strange to hear at this depth. I looked around and marveled at a city the likes of which I had never been aware of. Then I remembered the discoveries I had made up till now, and the marvel changed into the same, now familiar, fear of the unknown. Perhaps this city was not a human construction. Knowing that, I started retreating back into despair, now added on to the fact that I did not know where I should go. I had been following a single path and had not come across any possible alternatives. I definitely did not want to go back to that pit of blackness, but it could not have been safe walking around in this place on my own either. Next came the sensation from back when I encountered the creature in the dark. The feeling of being watched. There was definitely something, or things hidden somewhere in those ruins, and I did not want to step forth in there. I felt cornered and helpless again. I leaned against the wall of the entrance I had come out of and contemplated taking my own life to just get it over with as I hopelessly looked around what I could see in the city. My eyes drifted back to the ziggurat in the middle and the cluster of buildings and bridges around it. I scanned the paths of the bridges and traced one that seemed to lead up to the surface. I traced it back down to the ground and my eyes followed the path I would have to take to reach it. I still felt eyes on me. The danger still lingered. Slitting my throat still seemed the best way out. But maybe, just maybe, I could make it. Maybe if I held on to the faint glimmer of hope, I could go back to the life I so took for granted. I stood up again, keeping low and carefully sneaking around in a way that I knew was really pointless given how in plain sight I was, but had to be tried. I walked crouched down and moving along the right wall. It was something I felt I had to do, but it still did not make me feel any safer. Being so close to the wall and touching it made me realize it was not a valley at all, but an artificially constructed straight wall, strewn with writings and hieroglyphs, none of which I understood or even wanted to. That being said, I did see a lot of drawings and carvings of some particular giant amorphous beast, one I could at my best describe as having the features of a slug, an arachnid, and a reptile. The path was also now littered with geothermal vents, a few of which I had been coming across for a while back when traveling through the caverns. The difference being that these vents apparently had broken the paved ground and seeped through it, enveloping the path and lower parts of the city with a warm mist. It did make sense considering how far below I was at that point. Before I knew it, I had been walking through the underneath of the heart of the city. Whatever watched me had not harmed me so far. It could even just have been my own exaggerated sense of danger. The buildings I wanted to reach were relatively close to me now. The path I would take to get to the surface was an incline starting from the floor and lay atop of a building that tapered underneath it to the ground. I wondered how this city functioned, what the point of that unique cluster was, and how many aeons this city dated back, maybe even before us. There was the tiniest sense of curiosity telling me to explore this city, but it was far overwhelmed by my fear and caution. I wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. Although perhaps if I managed to make it, I could bring home probably the greatest discovery in history. This added sense of possible fame rekindled the embers of hope in my heart. All the anxiety was now gone. The sounds of the wilderness far above me now sounded like a greeting. I was now a lot less afraid and in much more of a hurry to head up that path and back home. Thus I had forgotten about caution and was now sprinting in a straight line, wading through the increasingly hot mist the way home I could see ahead. I saw the ramp get closer as I ran, my eyes glowing with joy and gratitude, and planned to run right up it. Just as I reached the base, though, all of that stopped all at once as I heard it. That wretched siren. The one that had been with me up till now. The one that made me come down here in the first place. It was back. And it had now drowned out all other sounds around me. Waves of confusion, disbelief, discomfort, all washed over me. Why? Why now? The way outside was right in front of me. I had decided I wanted no more of this descent. Besides, where else would I go? I stood fidgeting, and then looked around for the source of that sound, where it was calling me to now. Then I saw it. Another cave, right beside the ramp, on the side of the wedged building. It was enveloped in mist, and now called out to me hauntingly. I shook my head in unbelief. No, I do not want to go there. But the voice, it just will not stop. I turned on my light to see inside its entrance. It turned on, flickered a bit, and went back out. It had no more battery. I had no other torch left, and I had used up all of my glow sticks. If I went in there, I would be going in totally blind, and had no idea what I would encounter there, just some more endless caves, or perhaps some other abominable beast, perhaps a whole world totally different to what I had seen up till now, perhaps something else entirely. It was hotter than the vents around me, hot enough to make me sweat buckets while standing outside it. I was dehydrated, and I had not eaten in days, as I had not been able to find even any bugs to eat. And despite the sounds of the wildlife above me, there was no such thing for me here either, and the voice sounded like it did not want me to go up even to secure food. The prospect of a way out had given me some hopeful energy, but now I was running on fumes. I felt sick. By all accounts, I would not return alive if I chose to go down there. I looked back up to the path leading to the surface. Hope, a way home, it was right there. Yet despair had the audacity to call out to me now when it was right in front of my grasp and tell me to descend to my death. Did it know my soul that well? I looked up. I looked down. I looked up. I looked back down. Two paths stood in front of me. And I made my choice. I chose to descend.